Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Got Harem as Owner. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Hers sighed deeply as he read over another incident report regarding Naruto. Apparently he had put itching powder in the underpants of the Hyuga clan elders and somehow managed to rig all of their radios to play Surfin' Bird on a loop. While it was a hilarious and well-deserved prank given the rampant arrogance in the Hyuga compound, Hiruzen feared that the boy may someday soon bite off more than he could chew. He knew that Naruto pulled these kinds of pranks as a desperate cry for attention or even an acknowledgement of his existence. Regardless of the backlash or consequences, he simply wanted to be seen and heard and not treated as if he were non-existent. What the boy needed most was companionship, someone to be there for him. And most unfortunately, due to certain circumstances in regards to Jiraiya, Hiruzen himself was stonewalled from putting the poor boy in a foster family. In spite of the numerous adoption requests and efforts of the late Kushina's closest friends and allies, there was nothing to be done since Jiraiya was Naruto's godfather and legal guardian. And even more unfortunate was the Toad Sannin's position as Konoha's spymaster, which gave him plausible reason to stay away from Konoha and thus keep Naruto out of sight and mind. There was also the matter of Naruto's living conditions. He didn't even know where to begin with that. There were many landlords who refused to let Naruto stay in their buildings, and the ones that would couldn't afford to lower the needed expenses. If Naruto had a bigger stipend, they could easily be solved. But unfortunately, due to his current status as a civilian and not as a shinobi, his stipend was largely controlled by the civilian council, who only gave the boy the bare minimum to live off of. Fortunately, he had a small trick that may kill two birds with one stone, i.e., solving the issues of the boy's state of living and helping ease his loneliness. There was one catch though. He'd have to expose the boy to a more dubious element of the shinobi nations. Still, he supposed the boy would find out sooner or later regardless, and it would be a small price to pay for aiding him in the long run. Later that day. So where are you taking me today, Gigi? You're not gonna make me go door to door and apologize for the prank, right? Those Hyuga guys are all a bunch of pricks. Well, Hinatasen and Hanabisan, they're nice. Hayashisen also seems like a reasonable guy. Naruto muttered in aggravation, feeling perfectly justified in his prank. We'll talk more about that later. There's something I want to show you. The Sandaime replied in an even tone. The blonde quirked up an eyebrow and asked what it was, but the Hokage didn't answer. As they entered a shop of some sort, the front door was marked by the kanji for chains. They descended down a flight of stairs and were met by a security guard that was reading a magazine, or at least pretending to, as his eyes watched them warily. The Hokage produced his shinobi ID card, stamped with the Hokage seal, and then signed both his and Naruto's names into a log on a nearby clipboard, prompting the guard to give a brief nod of approval and jabbed his thumb towards the direction of the door. Naruto-kun, we're about to enter one of the less desirable aspects of the shinobi world. We're entering a slave market. The Sandaime warned the boy as they entered through the door, his words shocking the Jinchuriki as he looked towards the Hokage as if he'd grown a second head. Are you serious? Why bring me to a place like this? And I thought slavery was illegal. Naruto questioned, believing it to be wrong to treat another human being as little more than property. He couldn't believe that such a practice was happening under the old man's nose like this. I am serious. I shall explain soon enough, and slavery isn't illegal, but it's highly restricted. Most unfortunately, slavery is a highly profitable business, and the daimyo's pockets are fattened considerably by those who want to keep the trade going. So long as they're shielded by the political influence of the daimyos, all of the cages, myself included, are powerless to stop it. The best we can do is try to put certain restrictions to help protect the slaves from potential abuse. The Hokage explained as they walked over to a series of cells. On the left-hand side were male slaves, and on the right were females. From the looks of them, they all came from many different places and walks of life. Naruto felt pity for them and wondered that if it hadn't been for the Sandaime, could he have ended up here? Slaves generally fall under several types. The two most common are the indentured, who sold themselves into slavery to pay off outstanding debts, and the convicted, who are criminals and fugitives that were captured and sentenced to serve their time as slaves. Naturally, all slave owners, traders, and even the slaves themselves must be registered and logged for the sake of security. That includes any visits to the markets, as you witnessed at the door. When the Sandaime finished his explanation, the blonde boy glanced towards the numerous cells in disgust and disapproval. This feels wrong. Human life shouldn't be treated as a commodity like this, the blonde muttered, feeling sickened that this was allowed by a bunch of rich and potentially inbred nobles. Something like this shouldn't be allowed at all. I strongly agree with you, and there are many others who share your sentiment. Unfortunately, so long as the daimyos say it's okay, there's nothing to be done. However, think about it like this. In the hands of a good and kind master, these slaves could have a chance at some form of happiness. I am fully aware how lonely you are, so I decided to purchase one for you, so you wouldn't be so alone anymore. Hiruzen explained, making the blonde gape at what he'd just heard. I know what you're thinking, but try to think of it like this. You'll potentially be protecting someone from the possibility of being sold into the service of an abusive master. While there are restrictions in place, there are also loopholes that can be exploited, regardless if we try to eliminate them. Now go on, pick someone out. The Hokage spoke and gestured for the boy to make a selection. At first he wanted to protest, but as the Sandaime said, he could very well be protecting somebody. Even more importantly, he would have someone to come home to. Finally, the whiskered teen gave a reluctant nod as he began to inspect the various slaves and noticed that on each cell was a name, a letter for ranking, a price tag, and for what reason they were being held as slaves. A large number of them falling under the category of unpaid debts. What's the deal with these rankings? Naruto asked out of curiosity as he walked down the cell block with the Sandaime following close behind him. All slaves are ranked according to what is considered desirable traits. Their natural beauty, sense of loyalty, skills, combat capabilities, etc. The higher the rank, the more desirable and expensive the slave. Naturally, ANS ranks are both the rarest and most expensive. Hiruzen explained, prompting the boy to nod in understanding. And then he came to a stop in front of one of the female cells. Inside was a woman that seemed to be practicing some martial arts stances. She had large golden eyes and long jet black hair with square bangs. Her hair is arranged in thin braids and twin buns shaped like cat ears, and ornamented with a pink peony and a golden tassel on the left bun. She was also wearing a short lavender and black chingsam, which is decorated with dark pink petals, with a dark blue crop jacket over it. She also wears thick black stockings, black ballet shoes, and gold anklets with bells. She took notice of him and approached the cell door, kneeling down until she was eye level with him. "Hello," she greeted in a quiet voice. From the looks of her, she seemed to be the stoic type, but there was something about her that the boy felt drawn to. He glanced over to the sign near her cell and found her name was Ranmao. From what he could tell, she had been arrested due to her involvement in a smuggling ring and had been labeled as a brank slave. "Buy me?" she questioned, pointing towards the price tag near the sign. "You actually want me to buy you? You don't seem particularly bothered with your situation," Naruto pointed out, since she seemed unusually relaxed as opposed to the other slaves who seemed to be hopelessly waiting in their cells before someone came to purchase them. "Yes, buy me. Be good to me. I will be good to you." She spoke in a quiet voice, her words earning a smile from the blonde since that sounded reasonable to him, and he nodded in agreement. Sensing that the boy had his heart set on this girl, Hiruzen pushed a buzzer which summoned the merchant in charge of the slave market. After a few moments, all the paperwork was signed and the Sandaime gave a check to pay for the girl. A few minutes later, Ranmao was taken to get the slave seal on the back of her neck redrawn and keyed to Naruto so that she would be bound to him and so that only he could activate the seal on her in case she acted out. As this went on, the Sandaime explained the basic rules that all slave owners should know and follow. Most of them were pretty simple, involving the care and well-being of the slave in question. That they needed acceptable housing, meals, medical care, etc. A master cannot punish a slave if he orders them to do something beyond what they are feasibly capable of. A master cannot punish a slave without justified cause, and so on. At last, Ranmao was brought back to Naruto and she gave a low bow to him. Naruto had a little difficulty in believing that buying another human being could be so easy. He felt rather guilty for going along with it, but at the same time, he didn't want to live all alone anymore. "Now I need you to sign this for me, Naruto-kun." The Sandaime spoke and offered a piece of paper for the boy. Naruto sighed and looked the document over, and found that it wasn't paperwork involving Ranmao. This was for a new apartment in a much nicer part of town. Sensing the boy's confusion, the Sandaime spoke, "Now that you have a new slave, you're going to need better living conditions and a much larger stipend to care for her and yourself. For you see, slave owners are monitored by the Hokage and designated ninja, thus you now fall under my jurisdiction and not the civilian council." At that, the boy squealed in happiness and hugged the Hokage for helping him out of his terrible situation. "Your new apartment will be ready for you by tomorrow, so just bear with it for only one more night, and things will be much better for you," the Sandaime promised him, earning a nod of agreement for the boy. He had already endured hell for most of his life, and now it seemed things were finally turning around for him. He could certainly stick it out for one night more. Later, dump was the sole word Ranmao used to describe Naruto's soon-to-be former apartment. She certainly didn't mince any words, and the blonde had to agree with her. There was no other way to describe it. Fortunately, it wouldn't be their problem for much longer. "Yeah, sorry about this, but it won't be for long. We'll be out of here by tomorrow, so please bear with it for now and try to make yourself comfortable." Naruto spoke, earning a nod from the golden-eyed girl as he went to the bathroom to relieve his bladder. He unzipped his fly and allowed the urine to flow out as he thought about the day's events. He could scarcely believe that he owned another human being. It felt so immoral and surreal at the same time. However, it also seemed like Ranmao wanted him to buy her. Were there slaves that were actually happy to be slaves and wanted to be owned by someone he couldn't imagine the kind of person that'd be fine with that? Well, it was now too late. He had already gone past the point of no return. Ranmao was now his and he'd have to live with it. Still, it's not like he was going to treat her badly or anything like that, so what did he have to worry about? When he exited the restroom, he found Ranmao's clothes strewn about the room and saw the girl herself sitting on his dining room table completely and slowly peeling a banana in her hands to eat. Naruto had to blink his eyes several times to make sure he wasn't seeing things, his face turning neon red as he asked Ranchin, "Why'd you take your clothes off?" She looked at him and replied in a blunt tone, "More comfy." "Citrix," she asked him at the end and pulled the banana free from its confines. She opened her mouth into a small O and slowly inserted the whole banana inside until a bulge could be seen in her throat. Her lips closed around the end of the banana and she swallowed it, letting it fall freely down her throat in one smooth motion. "Did you just swallow a whole banana in one go?" Naruto asked in a clearly impressed tone, wondering how she had managed to avoid choking on it. She only gave a nod of confirmation, and opened her mouth as if to show there was nothing inside at all, showing she didn't bother chewing it up to make it easier to gulp down. "You are master, I am slave. Enjoy me." She spoke and gestured towards the couch. The blonde blushed at her words, wondering just how literally he was supposed to take them. But he nodded and moved over to the living room couch. He sank into his usual comfy place and turned on the TV, hoping to avoid staring at Ranmao's form. But even so, he couldn't remove the mental image that had been burned into his mind. On top of that, it seemed she was perfectly comfortable parading around him. He flicked his way through the channels until he came to a channel showing one of the Princess Gale movies, a favorite series of his with his favorite actress. He heard Ranmao shuffling around in the background but couldn't bring himself to look at her again, lest he start bleeding from his nose or his face lights on fire. Ranmao then entered into his view, carrying a small bowl of fruits and veggies for him to eat and placed it in front of him. She then wrapped her arms around his neck and took a seat in his lap, her firm rear pressing against his groin and her chest now pushing up against his own. He swallowed dryly, unused to this level of contact. Sure, his friend Anko would give him her own brand of friendly hugs and shows of affection, but this was of a more intimate nature. Ranchin, you don't have to force yourself to do this or anything." He tried to reassure her, believing she was trying to impress him to prove her value or something like that. "Quiet, enjoy," she whispered to him, taking one of his hands and bringing it to her smooth thigh. "Touch, enjoy," she instructed him, slowly dragging his hand across her thigh, then bringing it back up again and repeating the motion. She released his hand and allowed him to her thigh on his own. All the while, Naruto felt his face growing hotter and hotter. If this kept up, he was worried his head might explode. Was she seducing him? Was this how she usually acted? He couldn't even tell. Her skin was perfectly soft and smooth to the touch like silk, and was free from any sign of blemish. However, underneath her soft flesh, he could still feel the firm muscle beneath, showing that she definitely had training in martial arts. She brought an apple up to his lips and spoke quietly, "Eat." "Too skinny." At that last part, the Jinchuriki realized she was referring to his body. He was indeed on the skinny side, largely due to having a limited diet from an even more limited stipend. Fortunately, that was about to change. He'd be certain to try and gain some more fat and then use daily exercise to convert it into muscle. He took a bite of the apple, making a crunching sound. Over the next few minutes, Ranmao hand-fed him his meal of fruits and veggies. Over time, Naruto found himself relaxing in her embrace, slowly melting in her warmth. She also smelled very good and sweet. The scent was almost intoxicating. "How do you smell so good?" he asked without thinking, though if she was offended by the question, she certainly didn't show it. "Bubble baths, lotion, smell good." "You like?" she asked, prompting her master to nod that he did indeed enjoy her scent. "Good." Master's eyes were filled with sadness. "No parents?" she asked him, taking notice of the only bed in the apartment. It seemed that she was quite perceptive, to say the least, her stoic demeanor making it hard to discern what she was thinking. He nodded to her question and replied, "Yeah, I don't have any family, and I don't have that many friends." "You wanted to buy a friend?" she asked him with a raised eyebrow, and he nodded to her question since that was indeed the reason he wanted her. "Silly, slave is better than a friend," she spoke, making the blonde look at her questioningly. Without even needing to hear a question from him, she clarified, "Loyal slaves love master. Bad friends can hurt master. Even good friends can be bad for master." At that, the blonde realized she kind of had a point. He had tried making friends with Sakura, for example, but usually her first response was to clock him on the head. But still, he didn't think it was healthy for his only relationships to be with slaves, and he only needed the one. "I see. And you're acting this way with me because I'm your master?" he asked, and for a moment it seemed that his slave was pondering how to best answer him. "Master wants to be spoiled." "Yes, seal keyed to master's. Consents desires. Master desires love, affection, and attention," she replied, and then pointed to the slave seal on the back of her neck. Naruto noted she hadn't actually answered his question per se. Was she acting this way because she wanted to do it, because she was his slave, or was the seal compelling her to? Before he could question her further, she gently slid off his lap and stretched out her body much like a cat. There was a large bulge in his crotch, and then she gently pressed her face to it and began to nuzzle it. "Young, pent up, unhealthy, need release," she muttered and slowly pulled down his zipper. "How old?" she asked, stopping midway so she could be sure of his age. 15, he replied with a dry swallow. Was this seriously happening to him? This wasn't a dream, was it? 15. "Good, young," she muttered and pulled his fly down all the way, her slender hand reaching inside and pulling out his member, which was already hard as a rock and dripping with precum due to his arousal. She planted her nose as the base of his and inhaled deeply, giving a small of arousal, and whispered, "Sweaty. Stinky. I'd like." She opened her mouth and dragged her tongue along his member, every part of his from the throbbing veins to the swollen tip. Her hands unbuttoning his pants as she slowly slid them down to his ankles. You don't have to do this. You've already done enough." Naruto tried to reassure her, believing that she was pushing herself to do this. She gave him a blank look and wrapped her hand around his member, giving him a hard squeeze that made him shudder. Quiet, enjoy, watch movie, was all she said as her hand kept a firm grip on his and slowly pumped him, almost as if she were trying to milk him of his seed. With her master now silenced, she continued her ministrations and his member from the tip to his, she took his into her mouth and began to suckle them, forcing them to produce more thick semen. She released his nuts from her mouth with a loud pop as she felt his tremble in her hand. She continued to slowly pump it, each making him buck his hips as a jolt of pleasure ran down his spine. The hazy look in his eyes showing he was on cloud nine as she worked him over. Pent up, unhealthy, I fix. She spoke and brought her mouth to his swollen tip, bringing it inside her hot and moist mouth and on it hard, creating a strong vacuum as her tongue swirled around the swelling glands. She could feel his semen building at the base, which was currently blocked off by her strong grip. She loosened it and her slow deliberate pumping changed into a rapid fast-paced jerking. The dam broke as Naruto cried out in pleasure, his semen exploding out and gushing inside her mouth as she drank it down. His brain overloaded in pleasure as a hazy white filled his vision. He groaned as she out the last bits of semen from inside his urethra and released the tip of his from her mouth. Master's semen. Hot, salty, tasty. Feel better, she asked him and kissed his and each of his. I can't feel my legs, he muttered in a euphoric voice, sweat glistening across his skin. His first experience being a bit too overwhelming for him. And it didn't seem like his orgasmic high wasn't fading either. She looked down towards his and saw that it wasn't softening at all. It would seem that it would take more than a single round to drain his. She turned her back to him and planted her feet on his thighs as she straddled him ranchin'. Please, I may, Naruto mumbled through his days, earning an incredulous look from the slave. A well-endowed boy his age being how ridiculous. Still, she had no reason to not believe him. Give command. I stop. Order me. I continue. Choose. She spoke blankly, giving her master the chance to opt out, or to give in and fully enjoy his slave's body. Unable to resist the hormones coursing through his body or his raging, he spoke, please continue. Good. I make this memorable for you. Safe day. Master, welcome to inside. She muttered and lowered herself down, her warm slowly swallowing his into her juicy love tunnel. Inch by inch her cunt swallowed his until at last she had consumed his member down to the root. She slowly lifted herself up, allowing him to enjoy every exquisite moment, every movement, and every crevice inside her. Then she slammed her hips down, taking him back inside all at once. She repeated the process, again and again, teasing his young inside of her, using her inner walls to squeeze his, eliciting moans of approval from him whenever she found his G-spots. She committed them to memory as she continued to slowly rise up and slam her hips down. Her master reached up and started to fondle her breasts, making her own approval. She continued to ride him at a controlled pace. She could feel his starting to swell inside her, signaling he was about to blow another load. Her hip movements went from controlled to a high-speed piston as she worked to bring him to a mind-blowing. The sudden increase of pace being too much for him as he groped her tits and bucked his hips uncontrollably. Naruto growled deeply as he felt his semen gush out, filling the warm confines of Ranmao's. She felt his hot seed flood her insides. Had she been ovulating, she knew that she'd have gotten from even a single drop. Fortunately, that wasn't the case for today. They basked in the heavenly afterglow for a few moments and Ranmao lifted her hips up, letting his fall out of her. She rested her rear against his stomach and placed both feet around his, slowly pumping the leftover semen out of his member. Kami, you feel so good. Naruto groaned out blissfully, kissing the back of her neck as his fingers pinched her nipples. Seduction. Natural to me. Want master to feel good. Enjoy. Master can enjoy as much as master wants. She spoke and continued to massage his with the soles of her feet, her toes curling around and squeezing his glands. Her juices and his own seed giving plenty of lube for her feet to easily slide up and down his member. He groaned as he felt her soft soul sending jolts of pleasure down his sensitive, so it didn't take long for him to feel pressure building in his again, signaling another. He loudly as his spurted out more seed, covering her feet and toes in his semen. With amazing dexterity and flexibility, she brought her semen-covered feet to her face and off his seed, off the ropes from between her toes. Good. Young. Master enjoy. Master satisfied, she asked him, slowly sliding off of him and pulled him into a warm embrace. I'll be lucky if I can walk to school tomorrow. He muttered and planted a kiss on her cheek. Ranmao wasn't just a slave. She was a drug. She probably wasn't good for him, but she definitely made him feel good. And it was a strong possibility he'd develop an addiction. Master Young. Recover quickly. Ranmao ready to please, in a time. She spoke and stroked his whiskered cheek, eliciting a small purr of contentment from him. She was actually a bit surprised by the sound, never having heard a boy purr before. But it was definitely a nice sound. Again, why are you doing all this? I didn't ask you to feed me or have with me. He muttered, not that he was actually complaining, but he didn't really see why she'd go so far for him. However, she gave no response and only gave him an odd look, almost as if she found it baffling that he had asked at all. Finally, she replied, doesn't matter. Master is master. Ranmao is slave. We make each other happy. Yes, master gets slave. Ranmao gets master. Completion. No slave, no master. No master, no slave. Incomplete. You're not making any sense to me. But I guess if you're happy doing this for me, then it's fine. And you don't need to call me master all the time. Just Naruto's okay. He mumbled. He wasn't sure what she was trying to tell him, but he supposed that there was no harm in it. She was the one to initiate their session after all. The need for sleep eventually caught up with him as he drifted into a blissful state of rest for the first time. He no longer had to worry about always being alone. The next morning, Naruto woke up to a knocking sound at his door, and he suddenly realized that he had fallen asleep in his couch and his current state of undress. Ranchin, someone's at the door, put on your. He tried to call out, and noticed that she had already put on her clothes. Was she already dressed, or was she just incredibly fast? He hopped to his feet and pulled his pants up, trying to button and zip it up as his slave opened the door and found the Sandaime to be waiting for them. Good morning to you both. How was your first night together? The Hokage asked with a smile, and saw over the slave girl's shoulder that Naruto seemed to be struggling a bit with his pants. Enjoyable, Master Young, strong drive, good stamina, she replied bluntly, making her master let out a squawking noise as he screamed, don't tell him that. At that, the Sandaime brought a hand to his nose to try and fight off a potential nosebleed, but couldn't contain his laughter. The Hokage began bursting out tears from his eyes, from his nostrils, and loud laughter from his mouth as he held his sides. After a minute or so, the Sandaime had calmed down and had some tissues stuffed inside his nostrils provided by the young blonde. Well, that was interesting. Still, not bad at all, Naruto-kun. There's far worse things than losing your virginity to a pretty girl. Knowing you, it is safe to assume it was entirely consensual. The aged Hokage spoke, knowing full well the boy wouldn't ever even think of forcing himself on a woman. Naturally, and she kinda started it. But seriously, can we please drop this and move on? The whiskered teen shouted impatiently. His slave nodded in agreement as she wrapped her arms around his neck and planted her boobs atop his head, making him and the Sandaime blush. In spite of her stoic demeanor, she was definitely a touchy-feely kind of person. Of course, this here is the key and directions to your new apartment. The place has already been furnished, the place has been inspected for any signs of damage or pests, the kitchen is fully stocked, and the first 4 months are free of charge, courtesy of your new landlady. All that is left is for you and Ms. Ranmao to take up residence, and you can expect your newly reevaluated stipend in a week. I'm sure the amount will more than fit your needs. The Sandaime explained and produced a pair of keys and a piece of paper, giving the needed directions to their new apartment. The blonde smiled and hugged his grandfather figure in gratitude and spoke, thanks Gigi. I'll remember this for the rest of my life. I'd love to stay and talk more, but I need to get going. Ranmao, you go on ahead to the new apartment. I'll meet you there once I'm done at the academy. With that said, the blonde took his key and the directions with him and dashed off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The Sandaime shook his head a bit, knowing the boy was the type to march to the beat of his own drum. He turned to Ranmao and spoke, I only made 1 copy of directions. I didn't think to make 2. I'll escort you there myself so you know where it is. She nodded gratefully, then asked, young master has no food with him. Could go hungry. Whereas academy, Ranmao will make bento. The Sandaime smiled a bit, glad to see that she clearly had the boy's well-being in mind first and foremost. A girl like this could easily qualify as an rank slave with this level of loyalty. He gestured for her to follow him and explained that he'd show her on the way. A while later, Naruto sighed as he took his seat in class, glad that he was able to make it in time in spite of the fact his legs felt a bit rubbery from his activities with Ranmao. The reality of being a slave owner still hadn't fully sunk in yet, but he believed that he could get used to the idea of having Ranmao around given how affectionate she was. And he could barely contain his excitement at seeing his new apartment. Just who was the landlady anyway? 4 months without rent was pretty generous. His musing was interrupted by a sound of holy Naruto, you stink, you smell like sweat, and the blonde jumped in his seat and felt like he wanted to hang himself for forgetting one very important thing. Kiba and Yuzuka. Of course the dog boy would be able to smell it all over him. Got him, you finally pop your cherry. Naruto, who was it with, doesn't smell like any of the girls from our class. You got yourself a girlfriend we don't know about. I can smell a girl all over you. And she smells nice. She's definitely gotta be a looker with such a sweet scent. Kiba ranted, badgering the poor blonde as he slowly sank in his seat, trying to ignore the dog boy's questioning. But it was way too late. He had already started off a chain reaction of murmurs and gossip among the class. All he could do now was just let the rumor mill run its course and hopefully burn itself out. Fortunately, he was saved from further questioning when Haruka and Mizuki stepped inside, ready to begin class. After roll call, Haruka began one of his lectures and Naruto decided to drift off into dreamland, having learned long ago on how to sleep with his eyes open. A valuable skill if you wanted to keep your faculties intact from having to sit and listen to the scarred Chunin's lectures. Honestly, they were such utter torture he was certain that Haruka could have made a killing if he used them in the T&I division. His reprieve was cut short as the bell rang, signaling it was time for lunch break. The blonde cursing himself for forgetting to make a bento. He sighed in dismay as the form of Kiba approached him, likely intent on continuing to interrogate him for information. Scale of 1 to 10. How hot was this chick? She have big boobs. Any idea on her 3 sizes? The Inuzuka asked with a chuckle, waiting for the whiskered teen to give some kind of response. Kiba, I'll just give it to you straight, a horn dog. I had quite the day and night yesterday, and I started off this morning in a good mood. Please don't spoil my day by digging into my business, Naruto answered, not feeling comfortable with the idea of sharing the fact that he now owned and had with his very own slave. "Aw, come on, don't be all stingy. Give me the deets," Kiba spoke with a boisterous laugh. It seemed like it wasn't going to be easy to shake him off that easily, and it didn't seem like he'd be quitting anytime soon. Before the Uzumaki could even speak, a large bento was planted on his desk. He looked up and saw the form of Ranmao looking down at him. "Young master, Ranmao brings bento. Eat lots," she spoke quietly, and all of the other students staring at her. A number of boys looking at her lustfully while the girls looked at her in jealousy. All it took was one whiff of her to know that she was the one that Naruto had with, no question. "Holy, what a hottie, you scored the jackpot with this, and wait a sec. Did she just call you master?" Kiba asked at the end, realizing what she just said. And there was only one reason anyone would call Naruto master of all things. "Oh my gosh, Naruto is a slave owner, pervert filth," Sakura shouted in disgust, pointing a finger towards the boy as the numerous Uchiha fangirls joining in, excluding Ino, who sat quietly in her seat seemingly preoccupied with watching the reactions of the master and slave pair. As the verbal abuse went on, the Uzumaki had no idea how to explain himself or what happened between him and Ranmao. Fortunately, he didn't even need to say anything since Ranmao lifted her leg up and brought it down, smashing Sakura's desk into tiny pieces which silenced her and the other fangirls. "Stop upsetting the young master, or Ranmao will break you," the martial artist warned them with a cold glare that could freeze hell over. With that done, the golden-eyed woman popped open the bento and broke apart a pair of chopsticks for her master. Naruto muttered a brief itadakimasu and reached to take the chopsticks from her. But she shook her head and then sat in his lap. She then began to personally feed Naruto from the bento, placing the food into his mouth as he chewed. At first he wanted to protest, but the looks of shock and envy from the various boys were far too hilarious. "This is good ranchin'. What did you put in this?" the whiskered teen asked out of curiosity. She was a really good cook, as evidenced by how tasty this meal was. She didn't answer him and instead continued feeding him. Once he had finished his meal, Ranmao kissed him on the cheek and departed as quickly as she arrived to let her master continue at school without any further distractions. But not before sending another warning glare towards the girls who talked trash about her master. Naruto smirked a bit, easily being able to read the general atmosphere, and it seemed like most everyone was thinking that lucky son of a today was definitely interesting to say the least. The rest of the day surprisingly went without incident. He supposed that Kiba's curiosity was satisfied, but it seemed like the Haruno and her fellow Uchiha fangirls were ready to start spreading nasty rumors about him. There were plenty of those already thanks to his Jinchuriki status, so it wasn't like him being a slave owner would damage his reputation any further. Once school had ended for the day, Naruto made a beeline straight for his new apartment where someone was waiting for him at the doorway. It was Tsuma Nezuka, who had a large and toothy grin on her face. "Hey there, pup. I'm your landlady," she spoke and ruffled his hair. The blonde had met Tsuma on a number of occasions since he did odd jobs for her, working around the Nezuka kennels for some extra money. "I didn't know you owned apartment buildings. Thought it was all vets, kennels and pet stores for your clan." Naruto spoke in surprise, happy that a familiar face was his landlady. The Nezuka matriarch chuckled and replied, "I took ownership of this place after we arrested the previous owner. He held dog fights in the basement, so we stuck him in a kennel and let him get torn to pieces by the dogs. Let the punishment fit the crime, as they say." She spoke at the end with a menacing chuckle, showing her contempt for animal abusers. She then sighed and said, "I met your girl, Ranmao. Pretty thing, real quiet, but she seemed nice, and I can tell she's been all over you. And then some. Yeah, she's certainly something." The whiskered teen replied with a blush, making the Nezuka matriarch giggle a bit and ruffle his hair. She then spoke to him, "You take good care of yourself and that girl. Give me a holler if you ever need anything. I think you'll like your apartment." With that said, she mimed a kiss to him and departed. The blonde wondered for a moment if she had just flirted with him, but he shrugged and used his key to open the door to his new apartment. When he entered inside, he took notice that it had some very modern and expensive-looking furniture. The major appliances and the TV all seemed to be brand new as well, and the place was far more spacious than his previous apartment. He was certain that 4 of his old apartments could easily fit in here and he'd still have room to spare. Compared to before, it would seem he was now living like a king. As soon as he shut the door behind him and locked, Ranmao appeared in all of her glory. "Welcome home." She greeted him with a bow and pushed out her bust towards him. He could only guess that this would soon be part of his routine since he owned her, and she seemed rather open with her body. "Young master tired, hungry, want Ranmao?" she asked him and cupped his crotch, her touch making him shudder in pleasure as he felt rushed to his groin. Without so much as a care, he kissed her on the lips and then replied to her in a bit. "I think I want a shower first." She nodded in understanding and guided him to the bathroom where a sizable tub and shower were waiting. She immediately stripped him of his clothes, leaving him in his birthday suit, and then turned on the water for him, carefully adjusting the temperature so it wouldn't be too hot or cold for him. "Water good?" she asked him, prompting him to put his arm under the water to test it, and he nodded in approval. He then stepped in under the stream of water and allowed it to run over his body. He saw Ranmao grab some lotions and soaps and began to pour them onto her chest. After lathering them up a bit, she approached him and began to grind her body against his own as if she were using herself to clean him. She rubbed him down from head to toe, occasionally using her hands to lather and rub some soap and shampoo into his scalp, his groin area, and even the crack of his. No area of his body remained untouched by her as she continued her ministrations, and the blonde felt his arousal building. "Hold in, after dinner," she told him, making him nod in agreement since if he took her now, there was a strong likelihood he'd forget to eat. Once their shower session was done, Naruto felt a bit hot and bothered, but he was willing to wait for a bit longer. He didn't even bother putting on clothes since he'd only be taking them off again soon enough. And he got a certain kick to wandering about his new apartment It seemed that his slave had awakened a much more kinky side to him. He sat himself down in the living area and turned on the TV, patiently waiting as she cooked their evening meal. He had offered to help, but she refused him, preferring to do it by herself. He didn't bother arguing with her if that was how she wanted it. He glanced over at her as he watched her work in the kitchen and muttered to himself, "This is kinda messed up. Less than a day, and I'm already turning into some kind of a pervert. But it's not like I'm going around harassing women and peeping on them." At that last bit, a certain Sanin sneezed and thus accidentally exposed himself in a certain Amazonian village. After a few more minutes, the golden-eyed woman appeared with 2 large bowls of ramen and placed one in front of him. "Wow, how do you know I wanted ramen?" he asked her, which caused her to point to the seal on the back of her neck, reminding him that she had mentioned the seal allowed her to sense his cravings and desires, thus letting her anticipate his needs. "Thanks, Ranchin, for everything." He spoke gratefully, feeling thankful that she was treating him so well. He would never have thought that owning someone could lead to this. He had always believed that owning a human being was a horrible thing, which in many ways it was indeed bad. But that didn't have to make him a bad person. No thanks needed. Ranma was happy when young master happy. Eat, too skinny. Healthy body means a healthy life. She spoke and gestured to his bowl. He nodded in agreement and muttered at Adakamasu and began to dig into the meal with gusto. After a few minutes of taking the time to enjoy the meal, the blonde sat down his bowl with a satisfied sigh. Ranma had done the same, though it seemed as if she had finished before him. She crawled over to him much like a cat and snuggled up to him, putting her head in the crook of his neck as she muttered, "Digest. Relax. Lots of soon. Enjoy." He couldn't help but smile at her and gave her an affectionate kiss on the lips. Things certainly hadn't gone quite the way he was expecting, but at the current moment, he couldn't be happier thanks to his new companion. Some days had passed since Naruto came into possession of another human being. His guilt for owning a human life was quickly outweighed by the happiness and affection that Ranma gave him, coupled with his new apartment and his more than generous new stipend. It didn't take very long for him to settle into his routine. He woke up, Ranma would make a bento for him, he went to the academy, did his time in school, went home, had a bath with his slave, he or she would make dinner, they'd lounge about and relax together, and then after a while they would have. His nightly sessions with Ranchin helped relieve a lot of his stress, and his much improved diet already helped putting some much needed weight into his body. While Ranma wasn't much for conversation, her simply being there for him brightened things up for him. Now he had someone waiting to greet him at home, ready to greet him with affection. His days in the academy were much the same, except now Sasuke's fan club, Sakura in particular, seemed hell-bent on spreading ugly rumors about him. He honestly didn't even see how his personal life was any of their business. The rumors did of course spread out into the village and he was getting more glares than usual, but he didn't even care. It's not like he was the popular guy before he took in his own slave. Why Sakura and the fangirls went so far out of their way to do this he couldn't understand. But then Sakura was always a petty and selfish. Still, that wasn't really his concern at the moment. Right now he was going to spend the weekend at home in the company of a lovely woman, and he decided to start off with some breakfast. He was currently sitting at his dining room table, and Ranma was personally feeding him some pancakes she had made from scratch. Their bodies were, since it became an unspoken rule to forego the wearing of clothes in their own home. He had the sweet and buttery flavor of the pancakes, which were so warm and fluffy that they seemed to melt inside his mouth. After one last bite he let out a satisfied belch and wiped the syrup from his lips with a napkin. "I don't think I'll ever get tired of your cooking, Ranchan." He spoke with a smile, his words making her golden eyes sparkle a little, and planted a chaste kiss on his lips. There was a knock on his door making him wonder who it could be. Without even speaking, Ranma had somehow quickly redressed herself and approached the door. Opening it slightly, she exchanged a word with whoever it was and accepted an envelope from them before shutting the door. She presented the envelope to her master, which had a stamp that showed the kanji for chains like on the entrance to the slave market and was labeled to Naruto Uzumaki. Growing curious, the blonde ripped it open and began to read the contents. "Greetings to you, Naruto Uzumaki. We at the SMA, short for Slave Market Association, hope you are enjoying your first slave. We cordially invite you to attend our monthly lottery for a chance to win rare and exotic slaves. It starts today at 5:00 p.m. Drawings will be held at 10-minute intervals. Lottery event closes after final draw results have been revealed. We hope you participate and we look forward to further business from you. Yours truly, Scarlet, head of SMA." The blonde was a bit surprised by the unexpected invitation and remembered that the Hokage mentioned that the market kept a close record of both clientele and slaves. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but on the other hand his curiosity was sparked and figured he may as well take a look. If anything else, he also wanted to learn more about the market and how it functioned and how the slaves were treated in the market. Ranmao, for example, seemed plenty healthy and well cared for and exceptionally compliant. He wasn't sure if her cooperation and obedience was from her own personality, potential mental conditioning, or maybe a combination of both. Deciding to shelve that for the time being, there were still a few hours until the appointed time, and since it was the weekend, he didn't have anywhere else to be today. Going to lottery win more slaves? Ranmao asked out of curiosity, her stoic expression making it hard to read what she was thinking. Shrugging his shoulders, he answered her, I may as well check it out. And I might take a crack at it if the lottery tickets are affordable. Not that I want or need more slaves, but it's a big and nasty world with even nastier people, he muttered at the end, feeling like the slave trade was a vile and immoral trade. But what more could he do? Sensing his distress, she spoke softly to him, stop worrying. You are a good master, kind, caring. Many slaves would give anything to serve you. Ranmao sensed it at the first meeting. Kind eyes, her reassuring words making him smile a bit, feeling a bit warmed by what she had said. Master, buy more slaves. Protect, make happy, like Ranmao. Ranmao happy. She spoke and kissed him on the cheek. He smiled a bit since she made a valid point, and he was happy that well. She was happy, and if she was right, and if he had a chance to potentially bring some happiness to other slaves, then he'd do his best to grant them that opportunity. I'll see what I can do. If I win them in this lottery, I'll do my best to take care of them. If I don't win, I guess it's out of my hands. My new stipend is pretty good, but it's far from limitless, he muttered at the end, unsure of what to expect or how he could afford to buy more slaves if he wanted to protect them. There was only so much he could do. Either way, he may as well at least try to gather any relevant information about the market, and maybe learn more about this scarlet person. At any rate, it wouldn't do any good for him to worry about things beyond his control. He had long since learned to take things as they came. It was time to start wasting and killing time, and he knew just how to do that. Ranchin, do you want to have again? He asked, feeling it only proper manners that he ask first before taking her. Master shouldn't need to ask. Ranmao always ready to serve, she replied bluntly, feeling that her master needn't bother asking her for permission. If he wanted her body, he just had to say so and take her for his enjoyment. But then, this sweet and innocent side of him was quite endearing. Right, just being polite, I guess. He spoke with a small sweat drop forming on his head. Ignoring him, the golden-eyed girl grabbed his hand and guided him to the bedroom. She gently shoved him onto the bed. She crawled onto the mattress and stared at him like a feline preparing to toy with its prey. He wondered what she had planned for him this time. She placed her hands on his thighs and turned around, her firm rear facing towards him, and then she lowered her crotch to his face and she planted her moist onto his face, grinding her juicy cunt into him, giving him free access to it. The blonde wondered what she tasted like and experimentally stuck out his tongue, probing her with his tongue, and found her moist love tunnel to taste sweet and salty at the same time. She gave a low of approval and gripped his 9-inch in her hands, being sure to fondle his and give them a little loving. She brought his to her mouth and slowly took it in, inch by inch, suppressing her gag reflex as she easily swallowed him all the way to the root of his, a bulge forming in her throat due to the meat pole inside her warm orifice. She used her throat muscles to squeeze his and hummed around it, sending vibrations down his member. He groaned into her in arousal, greedily lapping up her juices as his hands spread her firm cheeks. The sweet scent putting his mind in a blissful haze, and her juices were so delicious that he couldn't help but crave for more and more. He planted his mouth to her cunt and began to forcibly her juice into his mouth, his tongue probing around inside and lapping up any juices he may have missed. His ministrations had a visible effect on his slave, who seemed to be grinding her harder against his face. He felt a pressure in his loins that was becoming very familiar to him, signaling his incoming climax. With a grunt of pleasure, he bucked his hips and hot semen flooded Ranmao's mouth and throat, her cheeks puffing out as she swallowed his sperm as quickly as possible with multiple loud gulps. She slowly raised her head, carefully up any semen that may have escaped the corners of her mouth, then gave his glands a few hard sucks to force out any remaining sperm in his. When she was certain she'd milked him dry, she released his from her mouth with a pop. Good, young, productive, she muttered in approval and planted a soft kiss on the tip of his. She removed her crotch from his face, making him whine since he wanted to drink more of her juices. She then straddled his waist and brought her rear to his, rubbing her cheeks against it. Experiment, she spoke, signaling that she wanted to try something a little different today. The blonde nodded in agreement, wondering what she had in mind. A new position maybe, as if sensing his unspoken question, she replied. Young, up Ranmao's butt. Want to try? She gripped his and slowly brought it into her rear entrance. She groaned in mild discomfort as she felt his girth stretching out her hole, but she quickly adjusted to the alien sensation as she finally got him down all the way to the base. Oh God, it's hotter and tighter than here, he groaned and grabbed her slender hips. His felt like it was melting inside her anus and desperately wanted to thrust his hips into her, but he had sense enough to let her adjust. She contracted and clenched the walls of her a few times around her master's, testing her control over them to try and put pressure on his G-spots. The loud moans of pleasure from her master signaled her success. Feeling more confident, she began to move her hips up and down at a slow and deliberate pace to ensure her master would build up to a large. She used her fingers to pinch his nipples and gave one a, her large golden eyes watching him for any kind of reaction to give her a better understanding on how to please her young master. His sensitivity to pleasure indicated that there was no difficulty in stimulating him, but she needed to test his kinks, his fetishes, and boundaries. But there was no rush, for now she would use her for his pleasure. She could feel his member swelling and twitching inside of her, so she clenched her tight pucker around the base of his and squeezed tight, blocking off the inevitable flow of semen. Ranch and I need to, he tried to plead with her, but she shushed him with a lone finger to his lips, her large breast squishing against his chest now. No, wait, big, fill belly. She spoke with a slight purr to her voice and slowly rocked her hips, using the inner walls of her to keep a firm stranglehold on his. Sweat dripped down his forehead. He gave her a firm smack with an open palm, trying to make her relieve the pressure in his. When that failed, he tried again and again. She seemed to enjoy the stinging sensation from when he spanked her bottom, the crimson handprints making her rear tingle. Using her dexterity, she cupped his in the soles of her feet and used her toes to squeeze them, her firm smacking hard on them. The feverish panting from her master signaled that he was at his limits. Lots, fill up, she whispered in a lustful tone. She relaxed the walls inside her anus and then pistoned her hips rapidly. The sudden pressure release in her rapid movements were the final nail in the coffin as Naruto let out a silent scream, his semen erupting inside her with the force of a volcano. He twitched and shuddered under her, stars filling his vision as his climax seemed to last for almost a minute. It was almost like he had 3 orgasms in one big explosive finish. More. She cooed and squeezed his nuts with her toes, making him spasm a bit as she forced out more sperm from his, which seemed to drag out his even more. When it came to an end, a sense of bliss and lethargy came over him, his body feeling heavy and full of lead. Good, hot sperm, tummy full, she spoke as she felt his seed sloshing around in her bowels. She lifted her hips up and allowed her masters to pop out of her anus, his meat pole glistening from her juiced and covered in his own seed. Ran mouth cleaned, she muttered and took his in her slender hands and swallowed it into her mouth, off the sour juices and salty and bitter seed. She slowly dragged her tongue across the sensitive flesh and released him from her mouth, inspecting her handiwork. Satisfied with her handiwork, she cuddled up to him and kissed his neck. Sleep. Ranmao will wake master, she muttered. The whiskered teen felt too drained and sleepy to say anything. He doubted he could stay awake even if he wanted to. He allowed his heavy eyelids to close and let himself drift away into a blissful slumber. Later, Naruto sighed as he walked with a limp, his faithful slave following close behind him without even showing any signs of her own limp. As much as I enjoy with you ranchin', I don't want to get into a coma, he muttered in complaint, earning an apologetic nod from her. It would indeed be difficult for him to function properly if she overwhelmed his body. Still, it was quite the learning experience. Next time she'd let him take the lead and explore her body on his terms. They arrived at the slave market entrance where the usual guard was seen sitting and pretending to read his magazine. Naruto guessed it was some kind of facade to feign laziness. The blonde signed his name on the board and showed his civilian identification, and Ranmao showed the slave seal on her neck. The guard nodded in satisfaction and jabbed his thumb to the door signaling they could enter. When the master and slave pair entered inside, there were a series of signs directing them to the lottery area. They followed along and found an area with a large array of seats and a stage that was currently covered by a large crimson curtain. Numerous people had already taken their seats, and it seemed they were all accompanied by slaves of their own. In the private boxes above, Naruto could see large groups of people gathered inside and saw the occupants were men wearing expensive clothing and jewels as a show of wealth, and numerous women in skimpy outfits that were likely slaves. There was also a few boxes occupied by wealthy women who had surrounded themselves with male slaves, or a mixture of men and women. Before the blonde could find a seat of his own, a nearby guard approached him and spoke. Client 24601. Naruto Uzumaki, Director Scarlet requests your presence. The whiskered teen gave a puzzled look and glanced over to his slave, who seemed to be as confused as he was. Why, how does this director know me? Naruto asked. Aside from the letter that had been sent to him, he hadn't ever seen or heard of this Director Scarlet. The director makes a point to know her clientele, and to personally greet all new clients to establish good business relations. Follow me, the guard spoke, gently tapping his baton in an open palm, which was a not so subtle hint that Naruto didn't have a choice in the matter. Not wanting to cause a scene, get in trouble, or worse yet get Ranmao hurt, the blonde decided that it would be best to comply. They followed the guard up a nearby flight of stairs and into one of the private boxes. Inside was a woman in a crimson dress with blonde hair. Without even looking at him, she gestured to the open seat next to her. Naruto bit his lip and slowly walked forward. He carefully slid into his seat and looked towards the woman who could only be his host. She looked over towards him and gave a gentle smile, but this didn't put him at ease since her eyes were like ice. Cold, calculating, and uncompromising. Her eyes flicked over to the martial artist and gave her an appraising look. You chose very well for your first slave. Beautiful, talented, and perhaps most importantly, obedient. Had she been Arank, I could have sold her for much more. You got quite the bargain, my young client. She spoke with a crooked smile, her gaze now settling on him. He felt a bit unnerved as she looked at him. It didn't take a genius to tell that she was already sizing him up and evaluating him. He took a breath to relax himself and spoke. Thanks. I guess. Why wasn't Ranchin an Arank, and what is it you want from me? She gave a small laugh and replied to him. Ranchin, as you called her, had all the makings of the ideal slave. The only flaw is her cold and stoic personality. Most clients aren't interested in girls that have a short emotional range, though I suspect it takes a special kind of person to be able to read her. And what do I want from you? The same thing I want from all of my clientele. Your continued patronage. He blinked his eyes a few times and then spoke flatly. I'm not really interested in buying more slaves. I'm just here for information. She laughed coldly at his denial and wagged a finger from side to side in a mocking gesture. Spare me the holier-than-thou attitude. You haven't any right to judge me. I have met all manner of clients who buy slaves for all manner of reasons, from labor, companionship, and more. If you weren't interested in more slaves, you wouldn't have bothered coming back. If it was only information you wanted, you could have gone to the library or asked your Hawkage. He is my supervisor after all. She spoke in a haughty manner, giving a knowing smirk as her eyes pierced through the teenager, her words making him tense up. She definitely got him there. Your reasons for desiring slaves are of no importance to me. My only job is to see that the merchandise is healthy and well-tended, sold off for the best prices, and then log all the relevant information for security's sake. What happens to the girls afterwards isn't my concern unless it affects my business, she explained in a matter-of-fact tone. She loosely laced her fingers together and waited for his response. I don't understand how you can live with yourself by selling human lives. If what happens to them doesn't bother you, why care for their needs at all? He asked with a small glare, earning a pitying look from Scarlet as she shook her head. Sick, unhealthy, and mentally unstable slaves don't sell for much. Healthy, strong, and desirable slaves make money, and dead slaves sell for nothing. And I can live with myself, because before I came along and brought stability and order to this business, slaves lived in their own feces and urine, eating table scraps and dog food as they waited to be sold off. Some just decided to bash their heads against a wall and end their miserable existence. The slave trade was run by thugs and animals with no sense of business or etiquette. I put an end to all of that. And just what is human life worth cheap enough for politicians to send your warriors and ninjas off to war to fight over patches of dirt and pedigrees that offer special powers, yet valuable enough that people will pay well for the right kind of slave they desire. So please, save your judgments. I feel perfectly justified. She spoke in a blunt manner, cutting down any arguments the boy had. He looked at his own slave and remembered how healthy and immaculate she looked upon first meeting her. If it weren't for the fact she was locked in a cell and had that slave seal on the back of her neck, he wouldn't have even guessed she was in fact a slave. And while he didn't pay any real attention to the other slaves that day, he couldn't remember seeing anyone in a state of ill health. He hummed to himself in thought and then saw the curtains on the stage part open. His eyes widened on the stage as he saw two towering figures on the stage. There was only one word that could best describe what they were. Ogres. The announcer on stage began to speak, announcing the first draw of the lottery would now begin, and gave a brief description of the merchandise, which were indeed ogres as Naruto successfully guessed, and explained that they were excellent specimens for physical labor. Easily seeing his surprise, Scarlet spoke. Tell me honestly, do you truly believe that all the world's wonders can be found on a singular continent? There's far more to the world than your shinobi nations. And for those like me, it offers countless business opportunities, such as collecting the rare and exotic. Mining corporations, for example, will pay very well for those brutish ogres for labor or security. I don't get it. Why hold these lotteries? Naruto asked, and jumped in his seat when he heard a small click. He looked at his armrest and saw some kind of electronic device had appeared, asking him how many lottery tickets he would like to purchase for this round. Simple. To drum up profits. Each ticket is worth 10,000 ryo. The rarer and more exotic the specimens, the more clients will spend in order to win them. The more tickets you buy, the better your chances of winning. The more tickets bought means more money in my coffers. Slaves aren't just commodities, but symbols of status, and there are some kinds that people will spend millions for, she explained as a large screen flashed to life above the stage. All at once the names of certain clients appeared as they purchased as many tickets as possible to win. Naruto recognized a few of them belonging to major corporations and the like as their numbers continued to rise. After a few minutes, the end of the lottery came to a close, and the Jinchuriki's eyes almost bugged out of his head at the amount spent. Almost 500,000 ryo. It wasn't long until the next round began and the next prize was announced. Time passed as the blonde watched the lottery quietly, all of the prize slaves being suited for physical labor or bodyguard duties. He guessed that the grand prize was being saved for last, since a number of the other patrons seemed to be saving their money for now. He wondered how Scarlet managed to acquire creatures and other species from outside of the nations, and more importantly how she got away with it. And took a guess that since they weren't from the shinobi nations, then they weren't protected by its laws. Talk about a large and nasty loophole if there ever was one. Finally, the announcer stated that the final draw was at hand. A trio of female figures appeared on the stage, and a wave of gasps and squeals of delight came from the crowd. The first thing Naruto noticed was that two of them had brown skin that was seldom seen in Konoha, and the second thing he noticed was that all three of them had pointed ears. And now I give you the grand prize, 3 lovely elf maidens, 2 of them of the rare dark elf race, and the third a gorgeous and bountiful white-skinned high elf. Their names are Chloe, Olga, and Celestine. Better buy them quickly while you can. 3 elves at once is potentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. At that, ticket sales went through the roof, already reaching the tens of millions in the span of a few seconds. One of the elf girls, a brown-skinned one with blonde hair, shouted angrily at the crowd, "Human filth, I hope you all rot in hell. I swear that I'll break free and kill that Volt for doing this to us." The crowd laughed at her, finding her outburst amusing. Even in Scarlet's private box, Naruto could hear some of the nobles present talking about breaking the elves into obedient. Growling angrily, he clicked on his own device and bought a ticket, hoping to save the elves from whatever fate may await them. Although the director seemed both baffled and amused by his attempt, "Naruto, darling, don't tell me you wasted your money on a single ticket in some vain hope to save those girls. It must be nice, being so young and naive." She spoke in a somewhat mocking voice, pointing towards the monitor above the stage showing that the top ticket holder had spent almost 700 million to try and win the elves. What hope could a single ticket have? Then the ticket sales came to a halt as the draw results were announced. And the winner was Naruto Uzumaki. The crowd let out a series of shocked gasps, disappointed groans, and even some outraged screams. The director herself was stunned into silence as her brain almost ceased to function. Statistically speaking, there was absolutely no way that the boy could have won with a single ticket against clients who had purchased hundreds if not thousands to win the lottery. But he still won all the same, fair and square. "What was that you were saying before? And let me just ask, it must be nice to be a cold-hearted slave merchant who can only think about gains and losses." He spoke in a mocking voice and flipped her the bird. The corner of her mouth twitched, a strong urge to slap the boy silly coming over the director. Instead, she slowly clapped her hands and gave a curt touche. "Come on, Ranchin. Let's get the girls and get out of here. I think I'm done here for today." Naruto spoke, earning a nod from the golden-eyed slave as she obediently followed him, leaving behind the director, who smiled to herself a bit and muttered something about having an interesting client. A few minutes later, Naruto had signed the needed paperwork and the elf seals were keyed to his, much like Ranmao's. The fair-skinned elf seemed to have a saddened look on her face, but she quickly hid it behind a kind smile as she gave him a polite curtsy. The two dark-skinned ones had looks of disdain and resentment on their faces. "I can't believe that we're being forced to endure such humiliation. It is bad enough we lost our homes and kingdoms, but now we must be subservient to an adolescent human male. Will this disgrace ever end?" The tall one with brown skin and black hair muttered in disgust. "Could be worse." Naruto spoke with a nervous smile. Even though he was supposed to be their master, the black-haired elf made him feel a bit small at the moment. The fair-skinned elf continued to smile in a kind manner and spoke gently. "Fret not, Olgadono. I think this one is different. I sense no malevolence or evil in his heart, and I hope you take good care of us, young master. I am Celestine. This is Olga, and her right hand, Chloe. Please forgive their hostile tone. They have good reason to mistrust humankind." The whiskered teen gave a small nod, since the one called Olga had just mentioned something about losing a kingdom. He supposed that probably had something to do with her hostility. For now, he'd just let them ease into their new position at their own pace. "Well, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Nice to meet you all. This is Ranmao, my other slave. We'll be heading home so you can get settled, and please, you don't have to call me master or anything like that if you don't want to." He spoke in a calming voice, hoping to put the elves at ease. "How about we call you swine, or filth then?" the one called Chloe asked in a snarky voice. At her words, Ranmao cracked her knuckles and seemed ready to beat the elf within an inch of her life for her mockery, but was stopped by a raised hand from her master, who told her to give them time to adjust. The martial artist realized he had a point. Not all slaves could easily settle into their roles like her. And while she wasn't overly familiar with elvenkind, she did remember reading from some fictional books, or perhaps not so fictional now, that elves were very proud creatures. After that quick exchange, their master declared it was time to head home. Not having any choice in the matter, the elves followed him and wondered what his living quarters would be like. "Have patience with this one. I sense he has a good heart, but it is filled with pain and uncertainty," Celestine whispered to her fellow elves. Her counterpart Olga said nothing, only caring that she could sense a great power emanating from their new master, the kind that had the potential to destroy the world, or at the very least a certain country. Chloe, for her part, was muttering to herself something about mercenary bastards, cutting off their manhood and taking them as trophies to hang over a mantle. All the while, Naruto was certain he'd have his work cut out for him with this bunch. Later, the walk towards their home was an interesting experience. The elves' clothes, or apparent lack thereof in certain areas, definitely attracted the attention of a number of passing civilians. Not to mention the brown skin of the dark elves was also a rare sight in Konoha, and most noticeably, people couldn't stop staring at their pointed ears. Some people assumed they were cosplayers or something, but there were a few that seemed to question if they were actually real. At any rate, they had arrived home without any incident, and the elves seemed rather impressed by how spacious the domicile was. "Oh my, what a lovely home," Celestine spoke as she gently clapped her hands together and began to walk about and take in the sights. Olga observed the place with a more scrutinizing gaze and asked, "This place doesn't seem well equipped. Where's your fireplace? How do you keep warm in wintertime?" Her master seemed a bit puzzled by her question, but he shrugged his shoulders and guessed they came from a part of the world that didn't have the same level of technology as the shinobi nations. "Most people don't really use fireplaces anymore. We use air conditioning to cool or warm our homes if need." He tried to explain but was cut off by the fallen queen. Air conditioning, what is that, some kind of spell? How does it work, and how do you cook your meals without a fireplace? Do you eat your meals raw like wild animals? Olga asked in a rapid-fire manner, her curiosity obviously being too much to contain at this point. Before he could even begin to answer her questions, Chloe let out a surprised yelp when she accidentally turned on the television after messing around and inspecting it. A movie appeared on the screen showing a man in a mask fighting soldiers and then carving a Z into a wall. What is this devilry? Some kind of scrying mirror? Where is this taking place? Who are these men? Is your kingdom in revolt? Who is the tyrant that must be cast from their throne? Speak to me, Chloe asked in a similar manner to her queen. Finally, Celestine reappeared with a look of embarrassment on her face as she spoke. Young master, I can't find a chamber pot. Where might one be? At her question, the whiskered teen made a sputtering noise followed by full-blown laughter, unable to contain his amusement from how the elves were behaving and their curiosity. When he had calmed himself, he spoke. Okay, ladies, I'll try my best to explain everything. Let's start with this chamber pot business. About an hour or so later, about answering their questions, it seemed that they were stuck with many more questions than answers. Eventually, it got to the point where their new master couldn't accurately explain or answer their questions. So they decided to simply accept things as they were rather than question at all. Suffice it to say, they were impressed by how much more advanced technology was in this part of the world. Chloe seemed particularly interested in the television and wondered what other visions of entertainment it could provide. Amazing. The imagination of humans is utterly astounding. I should be more wary in the future when I conquer humankind if their technology can be a close match to magic, Olga muttered to herself, making Naruto sweat drop a bit at the mention of her intended conquest. I've pretty much answered your questions. I think it's fair you answer some of mine. What were your lives like before you became slaves? How did you become slaves? Where are you from? He asked them. The elves looked to one another and decided to indulge his curiosity since he had done so for them. The fallen queen cleared her throat and spoke. I was once the queen of my own kingdom. Chloe was my right hand, aide and bodyguard. We were beset by a mercenary army headed by a man named Volt, who was hired by the cultist heathen church that worshipped by longtime enemy Celestine. However, after conquering us, he betrayed Celestine and her allies. Needing finances to fund his own conquest, he sold us into slavery since we dark elves are worth a lot on the slave markets. Celestine so happened to be there to try and negotiate for peace. She's supposedly a reincarnated goddess or some nonsense like that and has the naive notion that humans and non-humans can live in peace. At the end of her explanation, the high elf piped, and I don't think it's naive to desire peace. There are plenty of good people in the world that hate seeing others suffer. Although I admit, hiring Volt and his army was a costly mistake indeed, Celestine muttered at the end with a saddened expression. Don't be stupid. Did you not see the state of our country when we were sent away? Women were being raped in the streets, and no one did anything to stop it. Humans are ugly and vulgar creatures that only care for their own desires, and they'll trample over anyone to get what they want. Chloe spoke bitterly, her eyes filled with pain as she remembered a bit of her own history. Naruto felt deeply sympathetic to them. It was clear that they had gone through hell and back before he acquired them. He rubbed the back of his head and spoke. I can't speak for all humans, but there's definitely bad people out there, and I guess the place you're all from was chock full of them. At any rate, I hope you'll be comfortable here. I can't even imagine what you have been through. At his words, the half-elf wanted to tell him off and shove his pity where the sun didn't shine, but was stopped when she took notice of something. The stoic human girl had already stripped herself of her clothes, exposing herself to the world, making the half-elf yell out, what is the meaning of this, human woman? Why are you disrobing like that? More comfy, master-like. The martial artist spoke as if it were the most natural and simple thing ever. Disgusting. You make your slave prance about in your home in such an exposed manner? Olga asked with an undisguised grimace. She couldn't even fathom how someone so young could already be a deviant. I don't make her do anything. She kinda started doing that on her own and it kinda became a rule of ours. And you're not exactly one to talk. Those clothes of yours barely cover anything at all, their master pointed out with a large sweat drop, since the fallen queen's breasts were already half exposed for an example. I have no argument to counter that statement, Olga muttered in defeat, since he did indeed make a valid point. In their home country, the males were often controlled by theirs, so it was usually part of her strategy to dress provocatively to distract them, though it was also a double-edged sword. Well, if it is the young master's rules, we should follow them. The high elf spoke with a small sigh and removed what little clothing she had, fully revealing her soft and generous curves, along with her plump breasts and rear. Olga followed suit and showed off her own curves, with Chloe following suit, although the half-elf seemed a bit more self-conscious since she was more slender than the other girls. Naruto gulped and blushed a bit, believing he'd gotten used to Ranmao being constantly in the apartment, but add in 3 gorgeous elf girls, and well, he felt almost like it again, and it didn't take long for him to figure out what direction his flow was going. The elf saw the bulge in his pants, with the dark elves giving disdainful looks as Olga muttered, as expected of a human male. Still, it would be difficult to not be aroused in the presence of 4 females, especially myself, she murmured at the end. Naruto chuckled a bit in embarrassment and then found a pair of warm breasts pressed against his back as the golden-eyed martial artist slipped behind him and grabbed his wrists, pinning them behind his back with one hand as her legs wrapped around him. "Ran-chan, what are you doing not in front of the others?" He spoke, already guessing that Ran-mao was about to do something perverse. "Quiet. Enjoy," she muttered and easily clasped his fly between her toes and pulled it down slowly. The elf stiffened up and had a strong idea what she was up to. Before they could say anything, the golden-eyed woman fished out her masters from the inside of his pants and revealed his throbbing. The elf blushed profusely at the sight with Chloe sputtering, "That can't be natural. How can a young human have such a monstrous like that? What concoctions have you been taking to make such a grotesque thing?" Ran-mao used her free hand to wag a finger from side to side and spoke, "Masters. Thick, good stamina, productive, young." She on the side of his neck and grabbed his with her feet, gently stroking him off as the elves watched in morbid fascination. Naruto shuddered as the martial artist stroked his member between her soft soles, being watched by the elves, giving him a sense of pleasure and depravity, his body feeling hotter under their gaze. He a bit as Ran-mao gave his glands a hard squeeze with her toes, making hot precum ooze out in large dollops, giving her soles plentiful lubrication. Her feet caressed his member, and she used her big toe to trace one of the bulging veins teasingly. "Master, enjoy Ran-mao faster." She cooed and began to move her feet at a faster pace. She tightened her grip on his, being sure to rub his most sensitive spots, which made him make some more lewd noises. "Interesting. So you can use your feet to pleasure and weaken a male," Olga muttered in interest, bringing her face closer to better observe the human slave's technique, with her fellow elves following suit. "Masters is so big for his age," Celestine muttered as she blushed a dark red, her hands subconsciously descending to her wet snatch. "No matter how I look at it, this disgusting can't be normal," Chloe muttered in disgust, wanting desperately to look away but couldn't bring herself to do so. Naruto growled for a moment, then with a loud grunt, his started to spurt out hot seed. The elves cried out in surprise as his sperm showered their breasts and faces. "By the gods, how can a boy this much, and the smell, it's so gross it makes me feel ill," Chloe complained as she went towards the nearest restroom to wash off the semen on her body. Celestine stared at her new masters and watched as his seed dribbled onto Ran-mao's feet with ropes of link between her toes. The fallen goddess wondering how it would feel to have his member inside her, and wondered how good it would feel to fornicate with a young male. Olga quietly hummed to herself as she used a lone finger to scoop up a large dollop of semen from her. It was so thick it seemed almost like jelly as it stuck to her finger. She sniffed it and cringed a bit, finding her aide's assessment of the stench to be accurate. However, she could also sense the presence of a strong mana in his seed. She tentatively brought it to her lips and off the sperm, and almost instantly felt her magical reserves get topped off. Not only that, it seemed to be supplementing and strengthening her mana and body. "Interesting," she muttered in fascination as she glanced at her new master, who was currently locked in a passionate kiss with the human female. After recovering from his orgasmic high, a low growl came from his stomach, making the Jinchuriki speak, "I guess it's time for dinner. How do you girls feel about eating ramen tonight?" At his question, Chloe popped her head from the bathroom and began to shout in outrage, "Raw men eat raw men, we're in a country of cannibals, please gods above end my woes." Naruto sweat dropped once again and knew that this was definitely going to take some time to get used to, and it would definitely require more time for them to settle into their new surroundings. But still, at least he'd get a few laughs out of this. Hers sighed as he worked at his desk as he looked over Naruto's stipend. Word had reached his ears, just recently, that the boy had somehow won a trio of new slaves from Scarlet's monthly lottery. An impressive feat given how much people spent trying to win exclusively rare specimens and slaves. As such, the boy's stipend would need to be updated again to better suit his and his slaves' needs. However, there was one other thing on his mind. Scarlet had recently notified him of a notable pattern in sales. Once 2 to 3 months, a fresh new client would walk in and buy 10 or so drank slaves, all females, and then leave. Drank slaves were obviously cheap and easy to buy in bulk. Usually they were used for household chores, cheap labor, and most distastefully prostitution, which made them favored merchandise for pimps and brothels. Whoever was buying this many slaves must have been using proxies to avoid being directly linked to the slave trade. A common trick used by politicians and other figures of authority who didn't wish for the general public to know of certain vices. But who would need so many drank slaves? It was definitely suspicious. By Kami, the Sandaime hated the slave trade and how it objectified sentient life. No one knew exactly how it started, but early stories and rumors suggested that the Hyugas indirectly influenced and inspired slave merchants like Scarlet, with the infamous caged bird seal, the main branch of the Hyugas used to keep the members of their side branch in line. Supposedly it was a means to protect their dojutsu, but really it was little more than a slave seal. While slaves were mostly protected by certain laws and regulations, there were still loopholes that could be exploited, and any attempts to close them off simply meant the people who used those very same loopholes would have to get more and more crafty. But there was an even deeper and perhaps the cruelest and most sickening aspect of the slave trade that wasn't common knowledge. He would need to inform Naruto of this later on, assuming the girls haven't already told him. Hers could only hope that a day would come when this inhumane practice would come to an end. Until such time, he wished that more people could have an open mind and a kind heart like Naruto. If more people were like him, then perhaps slavery would be more bearable for the poor souls forced to live in. That is, if the slave trade isn't abolished altogether, if the people collectively shared in Uzumaki's sheer tenacity. Speaking of Naruto, he wondered how the boy was faring. Meanwhile, Naruto's apartment. You want me to do what? Olga screamed in outrage, her face now but a few short inches away from Ranmao, who stared her down with unblinking eyes. The martial artist pointed towards the toilet and handed the fallen queen a toothbrush, some cleaning soaps, and a pair of gloves, and spoke in her usual monotone voice, "Scrub. Clean. No work. No food." The dark elf wanted to protest. She wanted to say that a queen shouldn't be reduced to menial labor such as cleaning this chamber pot toilet. But her growling stomach silenced any arguments she may have had. She's got a point. You live here now, so you gotta pitch in to care for the place. Naruto spoke from outside the bathroom as he was busy sweeping the floors. Growling in anger, the fallen queen muttered, "I won't forget this." She snapped on the gloves and got on her knees, pouring the cleaning solution into the toilet, and began furiously scrubbing away, all the while quietly plotting her vengeance against the human filth that had sold her into slavery. In another part of the apartment, Celestine was busy folding the clothes and bedsheets while humming a small tune to herself as she carefully arranged them in neat piles. And in the kitchen area, Chloe could be heard grumbling to herself as she washed the dishes, mumbling about how elves shouldn't have to do chores like this, but that Ranmao girl's cooking was almost divine, and she couldn't afford to miss a meal. She had to keep up her strength until the day came that they could take their revenge. Ranmao, for her part, when she wasn't busy making sure the dark elves weren't slacking off, she was dusting the place, climbing in high and hard-to-reach areas to clear up any dust bunnies and dirt that may have accumulated over time. Olga emerged from the bathroom and bitterly spoke there. "I'm finished." She marched towards the couch and unceremoniously plopped onto the couch with a sigh. Naruto raised an eyebrow, believing that she had finished a little too quickly. His first slave shared his suspicions and quickly went into the bathroom before re-emerging and stalking towards the elf queen with an icy glare. "Again, not finished," she spoke coldly, prompting the queen to wave her off with an annoyed expression. "I just did it." "Did I not say I was finished?" Olga spoke with a sneer, only for the golden-eyed woman to jerk her back up to her feet and shove her into the bathroom. She wasn't about to let the dark elf laze about and think she could shirk off her duties, regardless if she liked it or not. "Do it again. Fail. No food. Thorough this time," Ranmao warned the queen and then departed to resume her dusting. Growling in frustration, Olga resumed the brushing, all the while cursing the existence of humankind. A few more minutes later, Olga felt like her hands were about to fall apart from the constant scrubbing. She called out that she was finished as she tried to nurse her poor hands, prompting Naruto to enter and check her work. He gave a satisfied smile and nodded to her. "Nice job. I know that chores are new to you, but we all gotta do our part. Thanks for your hard work." He spoke with a small smile. The elf queen wanted to snap at him, but his innocent and pure smile made her anger melt away as she looked over to the side. "I only did it for food," she muttered begrudgingly, her master shrugging his shoulders as he decided it best to leave her be and adjust at her own pace. He couldn't expect a queen to get used to being a slave in such a short time. He was grateful that Ranmao was able to keep them in line. He honestly wasn't sure if he had the heart to properly discipline them if need be. Chloe was quite vocal in her complaints, but she still did her work all the same. Celestine took to her choices almost immediately without any signs of complaint or grumbling, showing that she was either used to doing her own chores or was simply humble enough to comply. Most obviously, Olga, being a former queen, was unused to doing chores. He couldn't really fault her for her or Chloe for their attitude since they had been stripped of their homes and freedom, amongst other things. Their first night together was the toughest since there were currently only 2 beds available. He and Ranmao usually slept together, which left the second bed to the elves. Olga and Chloe quickly took possession of it, thus forcing Celestine to sleep on the couch. He had initially offered to sleep on the couch so the high elf could sleep in a soft bed, but she and Ranmao shut him down almost instantly and refused to hear any potential arguments. The following morning, Celestine mentioned that the couch was actually more plush and comfy than her bed back in her former home, so she didn't really mind. Though the dark elves complained that they couldn't sleep on account of his nightly activities with his golden-eyed slave. Talk about poetic justice. That aside, he couldn't help the fact she felt so good that he couldn't contain his voice. "Can I ask you a question?" Olga asked, snapping him out of his musing. The Jinchuriki turned to her in surprise and gave a quick nod, wondering what was on her mind. She stood to her full height, easily towering over him as her luscious brown skin glistened with sweat. She crossed her arms beneath her bare bust, pushing them up a bit as she asked him warily, "Why did you wish to win us from that contest? For what reason did you desire us?" The whiskered teen shrugged his shoulders and answered honestly, "At the lottery I overheard what a bunch of those assholes were gonna do to the 3 of you, so I tried to save you. I guess I got lucky at that point. Or maybe the 3 of you did. So it wasn't for selfish or carnal reasons that you wished to collect us. I find that difficult to believe." She responded bluntly. It didn't take a genius to tell that she was obviously mistrustful of others. Naruto supposed that it was due to her being a queen along with her previous experiences. He gave her a patient smile and replied, "Give it time. I promise that you can trust me." She gave a small scoff, not believing his words in the slightest. Still, he hadn't forced himself on any of the girls, so she'd give him the benefit of the doubt. "For now?" young Master Celestine asked as she appeared while carrying a bundle of clothes, earning the Uzumaki's attention, who gave her a quick gesture for her to ask what she needed to. "Where do your parents keep their clothing? I didn't see any adult-sized clothing except Ranmao's outfit." The whiskered teen sighed, and remembered that he forgot to inform them of his status as an orphan. He sighed as he spoke. I don't have any parents. I'm an orphan. At that, Celestine let out a shocked gasp and the fallen queen raised an eyebrow, feeling a bit surprised by this news. But what of your adoptive parents? Do you not have any family at all? Olga asked out of curiosity, finding it difficult to believe that a child would be left to fend for himself. Chloe also appeared, having overheard their conversation thanks to the heightened senses of being an elf, and was now wondering the same thing upon hearing her new master. Naruto sighed and gave them the quick rundown of his life, from his lonely childhood, his former living conditions, and so forth, leaving the elves completely stunned that he had lived most of his life on his own with barely any adult supervision. And from his description of his former apartment, he had been living in complete squalor. You poor thing, Celestine muttered sympathetically and wrapped him in a warm hug, planting his head in her ample bosom. He tensed up for a moment but quickly relaxed in her embrace, her breasts feeling warm and soft like pillows. He was sure if he tried to grab them, his hands would instantly sink into the warm flesh. Reluctantly, he broke away from the high elf and spoke. Thanks, Celestin. I promise to take good care of you three. We'll go shopping for clothes after lunch. Even if you don't wear clothes around our apartment, that doesn't mean you have to march in the streets in your birthday suits, and your regular clothes aren't exactly appropriate either. Rancha needs some new clothes herself since she only has the one outfit. The Dark Elves gave audible sighs of relief that they wouldn't be forced to walk in public. Although they had to admit, it was oddly relaxing to be free of the confines of clothes in their new domicile. Not that they would say so. They didn't want to give any false impression that they were adapting to their new roles. Ranchin, come help me cook, the blonde boy called out. While his human slave often insisted on handling the cooking, he didn't want his own skills in the kitchen to get rusty either, which made her reluctantly agree to allow him to cook on occasion. Celestine collected the stack of clothing and resumed her duties, proceeding to put them away while the Dark Elves whispered to themselves. As far as first impressions go, what do you think of this human? Olga-sama, Chloe asked her queen. The pureblood elf thought on her subordinate's question for a few moments before settling on an answer. I'm not certain as of yet. He doesn't seem all bad. More importantly, he doesn't show any signs of vileness or corruption like most other humans. So far, though I do know for a fact that his mana is very potent. It might even be stronger than both myself and Celestine at our peak. However, I haven't yet determined if he is fully aware of his full potential. The fallen queen muttered as she observed their master milling about in the kitchen, that golden-eyed harlot assisting him. Which was good since she'd be distracted for now. So if we somehow collect his mana, we could get our revenge and take back our kingdom, Chloe asked, her heart thundering in her chest as she hoped for a positive answer. Her hands clenching and unclenching as she imagined strangling the life out of that mercenary. Possibly, yes, assuming we can also free ourselves from slavery. In the meantime, we must try and collect as much mana as possible. But there's a catch. His sperm seems to be the most potent source. The queen muttered at the end with a frown, her words making her aide slump her shoulders in great disappointment. So you mean we must have with a human adolescent? Ugh. Just the thought of collecting his seed makes me ill. It was so stinky and gross. But if it's for the sake of my queen, I'll do anything for our revenge. I'll collect his seed on my own. The blonde half-elf spoke as she clenched her fist tight. You would do that for me, but what about? The pureblood queen asked, but was cut off by her faithful subordinate. None of that matters. What matters is our revenge. I don't care what happens to me or my body or what I must do. I just want my queen to be happy and for Vol to pay. Chloe spoke in a determined voice, already making up her mind on what she needed to do. Even though it sickened her to be in relations with a human, she'd swallow her pride for her queen and do what needed to be done. Celestine in the next room overheard them thanks to her sensitive ears. She couldn't blame them for wanting revenge. It was a natural response after losing so much. But she didn't want them to take advantage of their young master either. She would need to warn him of the Dark Elves plotting. Regardless of their reasons, they shouldn't abuse their master's generosity and kindness. She wouldn't allow them to do that. But first, she'd need to get him alone without arousing too much suspicion. If she could easily overhear the Dark Elves, they'd be able to do the same. Fortunately, she had an idea on how to get the privacy she needed and to keep Olga and Chloe from listening in. She would have to enact her plan tonight. For now, though, there was something more important. Her growling stomach needed to be thoroughly silenced. A short while later, Tenten yawned a bit in boredom since it was a slow day in spite of it being the weekend. In fact, the store was so quiet and empty that she was half expecting an animated tumbleweed to come blowing through the shop. She had already cleaned and oiled all the weaponry, dusted the clothes, rearranged the projectile weaponry 3 times. And in all that time not a single customer had shown up. If she didn't get some kind of stimulation, she was sure that she'd lose her mind. Her thoughts drifted towards her favorite customer who always came by full of questions about weapons and shinobi equipment, and on one occasion they spent almost 2 hours debating on the best materials for bladed weapons. It was quite the shame he didn't graduate in the same year as her. She would have loved having him on her team. She bit her lip and glanced through the store again. Since there was nobody present and she was all alone, there was a certain itch she needed to scratch. She slipped her hand inside her pants, rubbing her teenage through the fabric of her panty with a low and muttered mmm. Naruto. She was suddenly interrupted, making her yank her hand from her pants and blush profusely that she had tried masturbating while on the clock. and wouldn't you know it, it was Naruto himself with a group of women following behind him, 3 of which had pointed ears. Her blush deepened upon seeing the rather revealing outfits that the 3 had and wondered if they were cosplayers. Those elf ears looked extremely real. "Hey Tension, good to see you again. Busy today?" the whiskered teen asked in a friendly tone. The weapon user turned her head away as she tried to hide her blush and replied, "Nah, pretty slow." Were these girls with you?" Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and answered, "Well, their names are Ranmao, Chloe, Olga, and Celestine. They are my slaves." The bun-haired girl jaw dropped at that. She had heard the rumors circulating around, but she didn't believe them at all, knowing Naruto wasn't the type to get involved with the slave markets. She didn't know how or why he now owned slaves, but she wasn't going to ask any questions or judge him for it. She'd simply give him the benefit of the doubt and assume it was for good reasons. There was an awkward silence between them for a few moments until Naruto cleared his throat and spoke, "As you can probably tell, their outfits aren't exactly modest in nature. I was hoping you could help them find some new clothes to wear while out in public." The brunette nodded and guided the girls to the clothing racks to let them browse and pick out what they wanted. Ranmao almost immediately picked out a few sets identical to what she already owned, so she was the first to finish. Olga chose a black t-shirt with a skull on the front, a pair of jeans, a black leather jacket, a pair of leather gloves, spikes along the knuckles, and a pair of shinobi sandals. Chloe wore a dark blue shirt that had "For the Queen" printed across the front, a pair of denim shorts that showed off her legs, and a pair of shinobi sandals. Celestine took a little bit longer since she wanted something more comfortable for her large breasts. Eventually she settled for a bright pink tank top with a peace symbol on the front. Like Chloe, she took a pair of denim shorts and wore her own sandals for footwear. "Hell, you girls look good," Naruto spoke, complimenting the elves on their new outfits. The elf queen scoffed and muttered something about looking good in almost anything. The half-elf waved his compliment off but inwardly appreciated the praise anyway, while the fallen goddess seemed to be giving a happy smile. Naruto, why do you have those 3 wearing elf ears? Is that of yours or something? They look awfully real," Tenten asked, noticing that even after the girls had exited the changing rooms, they hadn't taken off their pointed ears. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the odd question and then realized he hadn't mentioned they were actually real true-life elves. He chuckled and answered her about that. "They're real. You're looking at 3 real-life elves." At his words, the weapon user's jaw dropped to the floor as she saw Celestine's ears twitch a bit. After a few long moments of silence, the blonde boy snapped his fingers a few times in front of her face only to receive no response. It seemed like her mind had shut down. "Come on, Tension. Elves existing can't be the weirdest thing in the world. Not when we have things like summons and the like. Not to mention there's that weird sunset genjutsu your sensei and Lee does." He spoke, trying to snap her from her stupor. She quickly shook her head and muttered that he made a good point, and then something about how vast the world really was. Shrugging, Naruto purchased the girls' clothes along with matching outfits for each of them and departed from the store, leaving the bun-haired girl to her thoughts. He decided now was as good a time as any to show his new slaves around the village so they would know the lay of the land in case they needed to go out on their own or run errands. He showed them the grocery markets, the Hokage Tower, pointed out the Hokage Mountain, and gave a basic summary of Konoha's history and customs. And finally, he showed them the academy and gave a brief version of his time there and his goals. "I see. So your Hokage is your king, chosen by merits and not through who rules over your village and its military forces. Is that correct?" Olga asked out of curiosity, earning a nod of confirmation from her master. "And you wish to someday take this title for yourself. But first you must study and train in this academy to become a full-fledged soldier, ninja." Chloe spoke, though her statement sounded more like a question prompting a yes from the Jinchuriki. "And by becoming Hokage you hope to gain the recognition and respect of your peers. And if nothing else, you believe it to be a sort of poetic revenge against those who tried to sabotage your childhood." Celestine noted. Once again Naruto gave a quick yes. "But young master fail. Twice already." "Why?" Ranmao asked, tilting her head to the side. He certainly wasn't lacking for stamina, so that wasn't a problem. Was there some other reason? "Not for lack of trying. My 2 biggest problems is my lack of taijutsu training, which puts me at a major disadvantage during sparring sessions. And perhaps more importantly, the clone jutsu, a technique that lets me create illusionary duplicates of myself, but for some reason I can't cast it properly, no matter how much I practice with it. That Godam jutsu cost me my chance at graduation twice now, and I am not about to go through a 4th year in this hell," he explained, his frustration for being held back in the academy quickly becoming apparent. "And the teachers, have they not offered any advice on your plight or offered some alternative means for you to make the grade?" the high elf asked with a raised eyebrow, earning a negative shake of the head from the Uzumaki, making her frown and wonder why the teacher were not helping him in school. It seemed strange and suspicious to her. "Ranmao, good fighter, assassin, no many styles, can teach dim mak," the golden-eyed slave offered, placing a gently closed fist to an open palm and giving a respectful bow. At her offer, the Uzumaki stared at her in gratitude and amazement, and even the elves seemed impressed. Even in the far corners of the world, they'd heard of the legendary touch of death employed by masters of pressure points and martial artists. How did this girl learn such advanced techniques then again? Maybe it was better if they didn't know. "I would greatly appreciate that, Ranshin." Can we start tomorrow after school? Her master requested, and the human slave curtly nodded without hesitation, almost as if she were happy to be of any kind of assistance to him. He gave an appreciative smile and clasped his hands behind his head and spoke thanks. Anyway, girls, if you want, you can explore the village for a while on your own. Just be sure to get back before dark. I'll be at home. At that, Ranmao bowed and departed in a random direction without so much as a word. The Dark Elves decided to check out more of the shops and see if there was anything of interest that may help them in their quest for revenge. Celestine, however, saw this as the ideal opportunity to warn her master, since her fellow elves would be out and about, far out of their range of hearing. If it is all the same, young master, I'll accompany you home, Celestine offered, earning a shrug from her master as they headed home. Minutes later, they arrived at their destination. After locking the front door, Naruto made a mental note to have more keys made so his elven slaves could come and go as they liked. Celestine didn't waste any time in stripping herself of her clothing, leaving her pleasantly plump body on full display. She sat next to her master on the couch and gave him a gentle smile as she spoke. Young master, there is something I must tell you. I believe that Olga and Chloe will seek to take advantage of your kind nature. They were speaking about how strong your mana is and collecting it by extracting your seed. I believe Chloe will attempt to seduce you so she can collect it for their revenge. Naruto was surprised by the news, but then, maybe he shouldn't be that surprised. He couldn't blame the Dark Elves to want to go home or seek vengeance against the man who sold them into slavery. I'll talk to them about it later. If they want to be free, I'll let them go. I have no reason to keep any of you here if you don't want to be. Do you want to go home too? He asked, and the High Elf shook her head negatively. No, I don't think I have the heart to face my people after what happened. But thank you nonetheless. You have a good heart. I felt it the first moment we met, and I felt the pain deep inside of you as well. She spoke with a kind smile, and gently pulled him into a warm embrace, letting his head rest against her soft breasts. He melted almost instantly. He said nothing, but he was grateful for her compassion. Her presence almost felt akin to a mother to him. Celestine felt her mark tingle as she sensed her master's subconsciously wishing for the affections of a mother. She bit her lip for a moment and then spoke. Young master, would you be opposed to the idea of me acting as your mother on occasion? Naruto blinked his eyes a few times and looked up at her, wondering what brought on such an odd question. Before he could even ask, the High Elf continued to speak in a voice filled with compassion. Please. Your lack of parentage has left a gaping hole in your heart. You have never known the love and affection of a mother figure. And I hope, in some small capacity, I can fill that void. The Jinchuriki blushed a bit at her kind words and replied, Thank you, Celestine. I guess it wouldn't be so bad. He mumbled, feeling a bit embarrassed since he wasn't sure how else to react to her words. She nodded in appreciation and gently placed his head into her lap, softly stroking his head while humming a small tune. The Uzumaki quietly listened to her and felt himself melt away, basking in the comforting and warm presence of the High Elf. As this went on, Celestine caught a small glimpse of a vision. She couldn't clearly see it, but she could have sworn she saw a familiar figure in it. Unsure of what to make of her vision, she shrugged her shoulders and decided to put it to the back of her mind. Her master was what was important now. Speaking of her master, she now found herself glancing at his crotch, still remembering when Ranmao had shown off his and stroked him with her feet to an explosive. Just from taking in the scent of his semen and seeing his, had awoken something in her, desire. However, she wouldn't dare force herself onto him unless he was all right with it. That aside, she didn't want to risk spoiling the comfortable mood. For now, it was enough to simply be here for him. The sound of snoring was soon heard as her master had fallen asleep. Giving a soft smile, she gently carried him to his bed and tucked him in, planting a gentle kiss on his cheek as a show of affection. With that, she quietly left the room and allowed him his rest, knowing he would need it both for school and when he spoke with her counterparts, the Dark Elves. A short while later, Naruto yawned as he awoke from his nap, feeling refreshed, and found himself in his bed. He guessed that Celestine placed him there. He felt a familiar weight on him and smirked as he turned his head to the side, finding the stoic gaze of Ranmao watching him. Hey Ranchin, what did you do today? He asked her with a smile. The only response he got from her was scouting. He raised an eyebrow at her answer but said nothing about it as he got up from the bed and stretched. Chloe and Olga make it back yet? He asked, and the golden-eyed woman gave a curt yes. He muttered a quick thanks and entered the living area where he found the elves watching television. A horror movie played on the screen as a female was shown running through the woods, screaming hysterically. Celestine had her face hidden behind a pillow while the two brown-skinned elves watched the movie with a scrutinizing gaze. Why does this female scream so loudly and so much? The only thing she can do to make it easier for the killer to find her is to drop to her knees and wait for him to end her existence. Olga asked, more to herself as she crossed one leg over the other. The Uzumaki chuckled a bit and spoke, horror movies are filled with all kinds of cliches. And yes, the sluts are always amongst the first to die. He took a seat next to Celestine and placed a gentle hand on her thigh, putting her at ease since she didn't seem to like scary movies. He then turned to the Dark Elves and spoke, Olga, Chloe, we need to talk. About what? The fallen queen asked in a disinterested voice, her attention locked on the screen as she gave it a judging look while muttering things like run for it or not that way or a drunk donkey can move faster. I know that you want to collect my mana. He spoke plainly, making the dark elves stiffen in their seats and turn towards him. They glanced over towards the high elf and suspected that she had told him about their plans. Before they could get a word in, he raised a hand and continued to speak. Now girls, I'm not mad at you. I already know that you just want to go home and take your revenge on the guy that sold you into slavery. If you really want to go home that badly, I'll see about letting you go free. I promise. Tomorrow after school, I'll head straight for the Hawkage's office and ask what it will take to let you go. I promise. They were absolutely stunned at his words. He knew that they had conspired against him, but he wasn't going to punish them, and more importantly, he was just going to cut them loose. You're just going to let us go just like that? What's the catch? Chloe asked suspiciously, sending him a suspicious glare. No catch, no strings attached, no hidden agendas. I wanted to save you from being stuck with someone who might do horrible things to you, and so I did. If you don't want to stay, I don't have any right to force you to. Simple as that. He explained as if it were the most simple thing in the world. The elf sensed the sincerity in his voice and saw no signs of deception. Olga gave a light smile, and then in a surprising gesture, she bowed to him on one knee, shocking her fellow elves. For never had they known a time when Olga willingly bowed to someone. The queen looked up to her master and spoke. Young one, no, Naruto don't know. If you free us, we shall never forget your kindness. We will eternally be grateful to you, and we look forward to hearing the good news as soon as possible. Thank you for everything, for being patient with us and for treating us with compassion and dignity. Chloe pursed her lips for a moment and mimicked her queen by dropping to one knee as well, bowing respectfully to the young human, and gave a brief thank you since she could find no other words to express her gratitude. It's no big deal. I'll get back to you on that once I talk with the old man. Until then, please bear with it for a little longer, he requested, earning nods of patient understanding from the dark elves. What of you, Celestine? Will you be coming with us? Olga asked her counterpart, who gave a quick shake of the head. No, I believe I'll stay with the young master and fade into anonymity. Besides, I'm not sure that I can go back after what happened. The high elf explained, earning a nod of understanding from her longtime enemy. There were things that couldn't be unseen or unheard after all. But that mercenary needed to pay dearly. If he were allowed to continue his mad conquests, then who knows what kind of damage he could do. Naruto then approached the fallen queen and wrapped her in a hug. She was surprised by the gesture but relaxed into it and returned it. I know we've only been together for only a day, but it was nice having you here. I'll miss you and Chloe, and I hope you'll come back and visit. Just do me a favor. Don't become as bad as the guy you're after. The blonde spoke and then broke off the hug. His words touched the hearts of the brown-skinned elves as they smiled a little. If there were more humans like you that cared more for the lives of others instead of personal gain, that valued good food, home, and happiness above money and power, the world would be a brighter place. We elves live long lives, but we also have long memories, thus we can carry old hatreds and grudges for centuries. But, so long as there are humans like you, perhaps a dream for peace isn't so naive. Olga spoke, then gave a small wink to Celestine, who returned the gesture as she beamed happily. Naruto crossed his arms with a toothy grin and spoke. With that said, we should have a big feast and celebrate your soon-to-come freedom ranch, and I need your help with the cooking, he called out, waiting for his first slave to appear. However, she was nowhere to be seen. It was kind of strange since she was usually so prompt. Where could she have gone? She was just in bed with him a few minutes ago. The lock to the front door clicked as Ranmao appeared, fully clothed, although she was covered in a bit of dirt and grime and her skin was covered in a sheen of sweat. She was carrying a burlap sack over her shoulder and locked the door behind her. What were you doing, Ranchin, and what's in that sack? The whiskered teen asked with a raised eyebrow. Hunting. Secret. Tell later. Master, call for dinner, she asked at the end, prompting her master to nod, and then she tossed the sack into a nearby closet where it landed with a soft thump. Her response earned some confused looks, but they decided not to question it. Not when they had dinner on their minds. A short while later, their home was soon filled with the smell of delicious food and the sounds of joyful and light-hearted conversation. Although unknown to them, they had no idea what tomorrow had in store for them. The next morning, Kami, why do the weekends have to be so short and pass by so quickly? Naruto grumbled irritably as he made the inevitable march towards the academy. He couldn't wait for the day of graduation so he wouldn't need to make this walk anymore or have to listen to any more history lectures. If he had to listen to one more lecture about Konoha's founding, he was going to jump out the nearest window. He walked down the all-too-familiar halls and entered his classroom where the other students were already gathered and chatting amongst themselves. Well, look who it is, the perverted slave owner. Sakura spoke mockingly, pointing an accusatory finger at the blonde, with her fellow fangirls following her example, like a bunch of mindless sheep. He didn't even bother responding as he took a seat next to Hinata since it was the farthest one from the Pinkette. The Harem bristled a bit at being ignored and continued to hound the Uzumaki. Do you feel proud of yourself, you piece of? I bet you make them waltz around in the buck all day long, and you corrupt them and them until they became mindless whores. The blonde couldn't help but chuckle under his breath a little. She wasn't completely wrong about but she wasn't exactly right since he didn't make them. And if anything, Ranmao was the one corrupting him with their nightly sessions. She even woke him up with a morning today to cure his morning. Did you just laugh? You think this is funny? Sakura screeched in anger, her face turning red in frustration and rage with a vein bulging across her forehead. Shut up, came a quiet voice, but it was still loud enough for the Haruni to hear. but it didn't come from the Uzumaki. It took a moment to realize the source of the voice belonged to Hinata. Wow, you actually managed to say something without a stutter. But I don't think I quite got the message. You want to say it again louder this time? Sakura asked and held a hand to her ear, waiting for the Hyuga's response. I told you to shut your pie hole, you gold digging. Nobody is impressed with your little morally superior act. Hinata spoke bluntly, and this time her voice was heard all across the classroom. Everyone was now staring at Hinata since they couldn't ever remember a time when she'd spoken like that before. This was way out of character for her, while Sakura blubbered as she felt herself shrink down beneath Hinata's gaze. The sounds of snickering directed at her made her shrink even more, forcing her into silence as she decided it would be best to avoid further making a scene and risk further humiliation. Hinata gave a satisfied sigh as she sat back down, the blonde boy giving her an appreciative look for shutting up Sakura and verbally tearing into her. Thanks, Hinata-san. That was pretty awesome. He spoke with a cheeky grin. Think nothing of it, Naruto-kun. My clan gets a bad reputation as well for slavery, though I admit it may be well deserved. She replied solemnly, reminding the whiskered teen about the caged bird seal he'd heard about that was a highly controversial topic to this day. Nasty business. He decided not to say anything for fear of accidentally saying anything that may unintentionally be hurtful. All the while, Hinata was looking at him. She swallowed a lump in her throat and asked hesitantly, Naruto-kun, can we speak privately tomorrow? He raised an eyebrow, wondering what it was she wanted. The confession, maybe he did remember a time when Hinata actively followed him around until he asked her to stop since it made him uncomfortable. Fortunately, she apologized and respected his wishes. Was she actually crushing on him? If so, for how long? Nevertheless, he nodded in agreement since he wanted to know what she really wanted. If he was wrong, it was an honest mistake on his part. And if he was right, well, he'd figure that part out later. Finally, Haruka and Mizuki entered and class began, thus starting another day of torture for the Jinchuriki, who had lulled himself into a trance since he already knew what was to come. His days at the academy couldn't come to a close fast enough. Later, Hokage office. Hers inside as he was busy reading reports, trying to follow up on that lead Scarlet had given him. But so far nothing had turned up. One theory suggested the slaves were bought in bulk to kickstart a new market in some minor village, which made little sense. For one, drank slaves are cheap and not good for making profits. The real money came from brank slaves and up. Secondly, the biggest and best markets are all found in the major villages where they were carefully supervised by the cages, although in Kiri's case, the market there had crashed due to the Civil War. The second theory was significantly more disturbing, so much so that he was unsure if he wanted to consider it. Or perhaps because he couldn't imagine anyone who would do something so cruel and horrible. But he couldn't discount it. It was possible that since all the slaves were female and were bought in intervals, they were potentially being used as breeding factories. A truly despicable facet that was banned and deemed inhumane even amongst the community of most slave owners. Keyword most. Usually, breeding factories existed for one of three purposes. The first two technically coincided. First, to produce future soldiers. Second, to produce rare bloodlines found in a male donor. Third, to produce even more slaves for profits. And of these purposes, the reproduction of bloodlines was by far the most common. It was possible that someone was planning to forcibly take a semen sample from Sasukacha and artificially inseminate multiple females to revive the Sharingan. If they haven't already, he would need to question Sasuke and see if anything unusual had happened around or to him, or if any strangers approached him. The Sandaime's musing was cut short when there was a knock on his door, prompting him to call to his visitor to enter. He was pleased to see that it was Naruto, who seemed to have a sleepy expression on his face. Hello, Naruto-kun. Have fun at the academy today, the aged Hokage asked in a mocking tone, only for the boy to flip him the bird, making him chuckle at his response. I heard you scored big at the slave lottery. Most impressive. But anyway, is there something you need? I have just reevaluated your stipend to accommodate your new slaves. More slaves means more expenses after all. The Sandaime spoke and showed the paperwork for the updated stipend, the amount making the blonde's eyes almost pop out of his head. Shaking off his surprise, the boy spoke. Thanks, Gigi, but you may need to do it again. I wanted to ask how I could free any slaves that want to be well. Free. Once he had finished speaking, the Sandaime seemed a bit surprised but cleared his throat to prepare himself for what will be a long explanation. I see. I can only assume your slaves haven't told you, or they themselves are unaware. But the fact of the matter is, there is no way to truly free them. The Sandaime said with a saddened expression. The blonde boy seemed utterly shocked and confused, prompting the Hokage to elaborate. The slave seal used by the Sma is a very intricate piece of work. Even if a master was kind enough to try and release his slaves, the slaves would either be compelled by the seal to return to his service, and if he still tries to send them away, they would be forced to return to the markets. And even if they were somehow able to resist the compulsion for a time, the results would still be the same. Additionally, any attempts to tamper with the seal outside of certain parameters would render the bearer in a catatonic state, and any attempts to outright remove it would be met with death via a seizure. Some slaves have believed that by killing their master they'd be free. However, it doesn't allow them to consciously harm their master with the intention to kill. And even if they employed a third party to do the deed, upon the death of their master, they would expire as well. hence why the seal requires the of the current master as a means of control and as a countermeasure. To put a long story short, once you're marked as a slave, you'll forever be one until death. Naruto was stunned by the explanation. He grit his teeth and his fists clenched into a white-knuckle grip as he spoke. That's bullshit. Aren't they given any chance of freedom at all? You mentioned something about prisoners serving their time, right? What if their time is up? Life sentences, Naruto-kun. Life sentences. However, it's not uncommon for the SMA to trick prisoners with sentences of 10 or more years into signing themselves into slavery to avoid prison. However, what they aren't told is that regardless of how long their sentence is, regardless if it is a month, a year, or 50 years, slavery is permanent. The Hokage explained with a tired sigh. And no one knows about this. This is wrong. It's bad enough that people are being forced into lives of, but they aren't even given a chance for freedom. How can the daimyos let this go on? Naruto shouted as he slammed his fists into the Hokage's desk. It is a tightly kept secret and not common knowledge to the public, otherwise it'd be harder to deceive people into signing themselves away. And I, along with the other cages, are bound by gag orders. If we try to expose the truth to the general public, we run the risk of paying massive and crippling reparations. And don't you dare think of saying anything or try to spread the word. Anything you say will be shut down, and as punishment your slaves will be taken from you and you'll be banned from the markets. In Naruto-kun, don't forget that it is because of the daimyos that this awful trade is permitted to continue. So long as the daimyos get their due and the SMA abides by certain rules and regulations, they are free to go about their business. All I can do is oversee them and make sure they're following the rules. And Director Scarlet has done so to the letter. The Hokage explained, feeling as though a few years had been snatched away from him for dealing with this inhumane practice day after day and was powerless to do anything about it. The Uzumaki pursed his lips and tears started to form in the corners of his eyes as he muttered, but I promised them. I promised. How could he face Chloe and Olga after giving them false hope? Even if it was unintentional, he'd given them a thread of hope. And now he was going to be forced to snatch it all away from them. I don't feel so good. I don't feel so good. The blonde mumbled as he felt a pit form in his stomach. He needed to get out of here, get some air. But he couldn't go home. He couldn't bear to tell the elves the awful truth. This was too much for him to take right now. Dark clouds loomed over Konoha, and in the Uzumaki residence the 4 slaves could be seen milling about their business. Ranma was sitting on the dining room table, staring out a nearby window as if she were keeping a constant vigil, her golden eyes almost seemingly never blinking the whole time. The elves seemed to be having a janken tournament to determine who had control of the TV remote. Chloe had already lost, so now it was down to the goddess and her dark counterpart. The two stared each other down, trying to read one another to determine what the most suitable play would be. Finally, they started tapping their fists on an open palm. And Celestine chose scissors, defeating Olga, who'd chosen paper. Got him. The queen cursed at her loss while the high elf made a happy giggle as she plucked the remote from a nearby table. I warn you now, Celestine. If you choose to watch something with a bratty bald child again, I will smother you with your own breasts, Olga promised as she plopped herself down on the couch with a pouting expression, crossing her arms beneath her bare breasts, which pushed them out a bit while her aide sat next to her. Not to worry, I won't be making that dreadful mistake again, the high elf promised as she turned on the television and began flipping through the channels for anything of interest. Thankfully, learning how to use this technology was quite easy and simple, very intuitive, even so it didn't take very long for them to adjust. Chloe anxiously looked at the clock as she awaited Naruto's return, eagerly waiting for news of when they could be released. Boy, isn't it taking a while for Naruto-san to be coming home, the half-elf asked as she chewed the inside of her cheek a bit, glancing towards the door as if she were expecting the young master to appear at any moment. Too long. Worried, Ranma muttered quietly as she pressed her fingers together, watching the storm clouds gather. Something was wrong, she knew it in her gut. Sighing to herself, she quickly redressed and announced, going. Search, find master. With that said, the golden-eyed woman left the apartment. Celestine looked down at the remote and sighed to herself. If her master was in some kind of trouble, she couldn't sit around indulging in television. She tossed the remote to black-haired elf and quickly put on her own clothes. Wait for me, Ran-chan, I want to help, the high elf called out as she chased after the Chinese woman. Chloe HM'd quietly and then asked her queen, should we go looking too? I'm feeling a little anxious for some reason. At that, Olga ran a hand through her silky black hair and scoffed a bit as she rose to her full height. No point in searching if we don't know where to look. Come, we'll prepare a tracking spell to pinpoint his position and work from there, the fallen queen announced as she began rifling through the kitchen for a pot and the needed ingredients for the spell. Fortunately, it was a pretty basic spell that could be done with household ingredients. The most key ingredient was something that came from the intended target's body. The drop of a strand of hair. Anything of that nature. There was sure to be some hair stuck to their master's pillows. My queen, are you worried about him? Chloe asked with a raised eyebrow, since she couldn't ever remember a time when her mistress had ever cared for someone that wasn't a dark elf, much less care for a human. Olga pursed her lips for a moment and answered, maybe so. He is but a boy, and he has treated us fairly and has agreed to free us. As our patron, we must repay our debts to him. Now fetch me a hair sample. There should be some in the master's pillowcase since it hasn't yet been cleaned. Swiftly now. the queen commanded as she placed a large pot on the kitchen counter as her aide nodded and went to their master's bedroom. With any luck, the sooner they brought him home, the sooner they would be free. However, the dark elves had to quietly admit, there was indeed something endearing about that boy, something pure and kind in him that brought out a part of them that they didn't think existed. Regardless of his promise to them, at the moment, they just wanted to make sure he got home safely. Meanwhile, POV, darkness, water, salty water, drowning, suffocation, floating, weightlessness. These were what she had felt, tasted, and experienced. But now she only felt one thing. Emptiness. There was nothing in her anymore. Not memory, not pain, not anything. Why was she here? What was she doing? Who was she? What was her purpose? Life slowly filled her again as she somehow gained the strength to move. Sluggishly she crawled in a narrow space, her body barely able to fit in these confines, the surroundings being wet, sticky, and there was an unholy foulness in what little air available that couldn't possibly be put into words. Then she saw it. A light, shining in the darkness, beckoning to her, calling her. With newfound strength she began to claw her way out. For every second she wasted, her light was getting farther away from her. She tried to call out, she tried to plead with it, to beg it to stay. But no sounds would come from her mouth. Don't go, come back, she screamed in her mind. She finally reached the end of the tunnel but was blocked by some kind of a gate. Still the light retreated ever farther away. But without a voice, she could not let the light know she was here. Tears leaked from her eyes, until she suddenly found something small and metallic in her hands. Grunting desperately, she began banging on the gates with the object in her hand, creating a loud clang sound. Again and again, she smashed the metal object against the gates, creating as much noise as possible, hoping the light was still in earshot. And then, a miracle, the light was returning. Ever closer it came, shining as bright as the sun. Its warm presence caused tears of joy to fill her eyes and her heart fluttered. Finally, the light, no, the sun was within arm's reach of her. What happened to you? Are you okay? The sun asked in a worried voice. In response, she could only nod her head, her voice finally returning as she croaked out in a hoarse voice, yes. Your Highness, a minute earlier. Regular POV. Naruto sighed as he had his hands clasped behind his head as he aimlessly wandered about. He had no real destination in mind. He was just trying to avoid going home and having to explain the horrible truth to his slaves. Both Ranmao and Celestine expressed no desire to leave. But now, he felt he had just betrayed the trust that Chloe and Olga had placed in him. How would they react? Would they be angry? Would they fall into a deep depression? Would they lash out? He didn't know. And he had no idea how to soften the blow, or if there was even a way to ease whatever pain he was going to be forced to inflict on them with the terrible news. This is wrong, the blonde grumbled, feeling completely helpless at the moment. He looked up towards the sky and saw the storm clouds gathering. He sighed, knowing he was just delaying the inevitable. He would need to return sooner or later. He just wished he had better news to give. Sighing in defeat, he decided to make the long march towards home and began walking towards his apartment, only to stop when he heard a loud metallic clang. He paused for a moment and wondered if he was hearing things, but then he heard it again. It sounded like someone was trying to get someone's attention. Whoever it was could likely be in trouble. Not wanting to leave someone in trouble behind, he walked towards the general direction of the noise to investigate. It wasn't long before he managed to track the clanging to a sewer pipe, where he saw a figure covered in filth and God knows what else. He approached the figure, desperately trying to resist the urge to vomit as the overwhelming stench grew stronger the closer he got. From what he could tell, the figure was a woman, but he couldn't see if she was injured or not. What happened to you? Are you okay? He asked, hoping she wasn't seriously injured. If she was, then she'd no doubt need a hospital. He could see her mouth moving as if to speak and then heard her croak out yes. Your Highness. He raised an eyebrow and wondered if she was perhaps delirious. Most likely she had some kind of a head injury. What kind of sick would attack a woman and dump them into a sewer? When I find that did this to you, I'll kick his. The blonde swore angrily. He looked about wondering if there was anyone passing by that could help, but the streets were empty, and thunder was rumbling in the sky. He feared that if the rain came down heavily enough, it was possible this poor woman may end up drowning. He tried to lift the gate open with all his might, but it refused to budge. It was much too heavy for him to lift on his own. He needed to find help, and quickly. Stay right there, I'm going to get help. He promised and turned to leave, only for his wrist to be caught in a firm yet slimy grip. He cringed a bit in disgust as he turned back towards the trapped woman who was now looking at him with tearful blue eyes as she whispered in a clearer voice, "No. Please, stay. I don't want to be alone. But if I don't go, you could drown. Just look at the sky," he warned her, pointing towards the darkening and rumbling clouds overhead with his free hand. She simply shook her head, her gaze never leaving him, as if to say she was now more afraid of being all alone than of death, a sentiment that Naruto himself shared. He nodded begrudgingly and agreed to stay with her. He took a deep breath, then called for help as loudly as his lungs would allow, his voice echoing across the empty streets. But none came. He tried again and again, shouting and screaming as loudly as possible, but no one heeded his calls. Either no one could hear him, or they simply didn't care enough to help. Bastards, sitting all comfy in their little homes and personal bubbles, oblivious to a woman trapped in a goddamn sewer pipe. He cursed angrily as he tried to catch his breath, his chest heaving and lungs burning from his efforts. He then turned to the trapped woman and asked what's your name. He was only met with silence from her, suggesting either she didn't know her own name or she didn't want to give it. Though given her current predicament, he believed it to be the former reason, especially if she had some kind of head injury. Are you hurt or bleeding from anywhere? He asked in concern. He couldn't tell due to all the filth and grime coating her body. He sincerely hoped she didn't have any open injuries that could get infected or get some kind of weird disease. The woman checked herself over for a brief moment and replied no. I don't think so. The whiskered teen gave a sigh of relief at that. But a droplet of water hit the top of his head, reminding him of the rain that was coming soon. Lady, I have to go now. It looks like a big storm is coming this way. He tried to warn her, trying to pull his hand free, but she wouldn't let go. Naruto, a familiar voice called out as the dark elves came running up to him, making the blonde sigh in utter relief. What's going on here? Chloe asked, demanding an explanation as she drew a kitchen knife, as she glared at the unknown woman in the pipe, likely believing that she was trying to hurt the Uzumaki. Found this weird lady stuck in this pipe. We gotta get her out, like right now. Naruto spoke, prompting the elves to nod as they started to pull on the steel gate, making it creak and groan a little as it stubbornly refused to budge. At last, the woman released the Jinchuriki, allowing him to help the dark elves try and lift the gate open, but it was stuck tight. He sincerely hoped it hadn't been welded shut or this woman was screwed to hell. I can't believe we're doing this. For some stranger, Chloe muttered, since she and her queen had never done anything like this before. Their usual exploits lied in the destruction of others. Silence, pull harder, Chloe. No living being deserves to die like this, Olga shouted as the rain began to fall more heavily, blanketing the area as a heavy monsoon came. As the seconds ticked by, filthy water began to pour out of the pipe, and it seemed to be getting stronger and filling the pipe further. The queen mentally cursed herself, angry that her powers were limited at this moment. If she could, she'd have summoned flames strong enough to cut through, but this infernal deluge would likely snuff out any fire she produced. They could hear the woman coughing and sputtering as the water got higher. Pull, pull, Chloe screamed out, her ears twitching when she heard the sounds of metal scraping against metal. It's moving, keep pulling, the half-elf shouted out, trying to urge her allies to keep going. I'm trying, the ground's all slippery, Naruto shouted as the ground was now muddy, their feet sinking into the earth and making it difficult for them to get any leverage or traction. Olga suddenly got an idea and began changing in an unfamiliar language, and ice began to form along the gate's edges. If we can't lift this thing open, we'll force it open, the queen shouted as the ice began to creep along the edges. The sounds of metal straining and groaning could be heard as the ice expanded. Finally, the strain was too much as the steel workings couldn't handle the pressure and some small explosions could be heard. Pull, Olga shouted, prompting the two blondes to yank hard with their remaining might, and the gate popped out of place, causing them to toss it into the mud. And at last, the stranger trapped in the pipe came spilling out, the water pressure forcing her out, making her land in the mud with a wet splat. Both blondes grabbed the woman's arms and pulled her clear of the water flow, allowing them to check her over. She displayed no signs of movement or breathing, so Naruto dropped to his knees and began performing compressions on her chest, hoping to force the water out of her lungs. After just a few tries, the woman's eyes snapped open and she coughed up the water inside of her, gasping for air before passing out again. Only this time her chest could be seen moving up and down with each breath. They all panted in exhaustion, with Chloe muttering between breaths, "You must love saving damsels in distress." At her words, the Jinchuriki tiredly waved a dismissive hand. "If I see someone in trouble, I'm gonna do my best to help. Anyway, how'd you find me?" the whiskered teen asked, causing the elf queen to flash a map hidden inside an inner pocket of her jacket which had some kind of paint-like substance on it, and explained they used a minor tracking spell to track down his location while the others went off looking for him without so much as a plan. With any luck, they'd return home soon. The dark elves then looked down at the woman they had saved, the heavy rain quickly washing away the filth and mud off of her body, showing her brown skin and light blue hair. "Should we take this woman to a hospital?" Chloe asked as she picked the unknown woman up and slung her over her shoulders. Naruto shook his head negatively and replied, "I don't think that's a good idea. I believe someone may have tried killing her. If we take her to a hospital, they might find out she survived and try again. For now, we'll take her home and inform the Hokage. He should be able to handle things from there." The two elves nodded in agreement since that seemed the best course of action for now. Hopefully this lady could tell them more when they woke up. Without a word further, they began to march through the rain towards home. Any thought of their freedom was currently cast aside in favor of aiding a fellow woman. The Jinchuriki, for his part, however, was still fearing the moment they'd ask him about being freed. He had to shake his head to clear his thoughts. For now, this strange woman came first. Minutes later, it didn't take long for them to make it back. They groaned as they stepped through the apartment door and shivered due to the cold rain. Fortunately, Ranmao was already there, with some warm towels at the ready welcome. "Couldn't find master. Came back. Celestine not home yet." "Who's this?" the Chinese woman asked, and observed the newcomer that was currently being carried over Chloe's shoulder. "Not sure yet. I found her stuck in a sewer pipe." Naruto quickly replied and helped Chloe deposit their new guest into his bed and placed her beneath the covers to get warm. The trio then stripped off their clothes and began to dry themselves off with the provided towels. The blonde wanted to ask if they should go out looking for their missing high elf, but a knock at the door was heard. When they opened it, they found Celestine had come back, drenched and looking almost like a drowned rat as she let out a loud sneeze. "Thank goodness you're safe, young master, we were all worried about you," she spoke, and then wrapped him in a hug, her wet clothes sticking to him, making him sweat drop since he'd only just dried off. But nevertheless he was glad she had come back safely. The rainfall likely forced her to return home. After a few minutes of drying off, Ranmao was now serving hot chocolate to everyone and then planted herself in Naruto's lap as he explained how he found the woman in the pipe, and then recounted both Olga and Chloe's heroics. His story earned a happy expression from Celestine, who teased her counterpart that she had definitely grown as a person in so short a time if she now felt things like compassion. Olga tried to deny it, claiming it was a simple spur of the moment, but the whiskered teen knew otherwise. Chloe took a sip of hot chocolate and enjoyed the warm feeling flowing through her for a moment and then spoke. "Oi. Did you speak with your Hokage? Did he say what it would take to free us?" At that, Naruto swallowed dryly since he knew there was no avoiding it. The Uzumaki bit his lip and spoke in a somber voice. You're not going to like what I have to tell you." He then explained everything he had learned from the Hokage, the elves giving off shocked gasps while Ranmao simply raised an eyebrow. Olga crossed her arms beneath her bust and had her eyes closed as she carefully contemplated his words, though it was plain to see she was deeply mortified by this truth. She could never go home nor ever be free ever again. Any chances of retaking her homelands and her throne had just been whisked away. However, there was currently a deeper concern for her. She looked to her aid and found the half-elf trembling terribly. You're lying. You're lying," Chloe screeched angrily, pointing an accusatory finger at the blonde boy, who simply shook his head with a look of depression on his face. He honestly and truly wished it were a lie, but it wasn't. There was nothing he could say or do to make it better either. "You promised to let us go, you promised," the half-elf screamed and tossed her mug towards the wall, shattering it and splattering the contents on the wall and floor. She seemed ready to lunge towards the boy but was stopped when she found herself trapped in Ranmao's grip. "Quiet. Come." Not helping, the martial artist spoke as she kept a firm grip on her captive, preventing her from moving. "She's right, Chloe. Lashing out against the young master isn't helping. The real villain in this is Volt. If you want to blame anyone, blame that man." Naruto-sama had no idea about this. Celestine spoke, trying to calm the half-elf, whose face was flushed crimson in anger. "I don't care. This is all the fault of humans. All of your kind should have rotted away in the muck where it belongs. It is because of your entire race that so many people suffer. Hell, you even murder each other for coin, for women, and other petty things. I hope you die a horrible death, you." Chloe ranted angrily, but was then silenced by a hard slap across the face from her queen. "Chloe, it's over. This is our new lot in life. Now be a proper elf and have some dignity. Naruto is, and forever will be our master. Without him, we would have become the playthings of more vile humans similar to Volt. We should be thanking him for his kindness, not spitting in his face for something out of his control." Olga spoke in an even tone, though from her eyes, it was easy to see the strong emotions running through her as tears welled up. "But, my queen," the half-elf tried to speak, but was cut off when the black-haired elf spoke. "Silence, Chloe. Do not shame yourself any further. I am not your queen any longer. You have stood faithfully by my side for many years, even after I pulled you from your original life as a slave. But those days are over. I am Olga, and you are Chloe, and we now serve our master Naruto Uzumaki until the end of our days. The sooner we accept this reality, the easier it will be for both of us, I suppose. After years of conquest, murder, and so forth, the gods forced me my just deserts." Naruto frowned deeply as he asked, "Chloe, you were a slave originally before we met?" At his questions, she gave a sad nod which made him realize that she must have been utterly heartbroken upon hearing this news. He couldn't imagine how it felt to be a slave, to regain your freedom, and then have it snatched away a second time, and then when offered another chance, it is all crushed in an instant. "I'm sorry, really. I wish I could free you. I really do. I'm sorry that this was all forced on you. I don't have any right to keep you against your will. But I don't know what else to do except try my best to take good care of you all. So long as I'm around, I promise to keep you all safe from those who'd take advantage of you." He spoke, reaffirming his resolve to protect them from harm. At hearing his words, Chloe relaxed, prompting Ranmao to let her go. Tears formed in the half-elf's eyes as she slowly got up and walked away, muttering that she needed to lie down. He couldn't blame her. She probably needed some time to process her current position. Olga sighed as she rubbed her temples and spoke to her master. "Do not fret. Truthfully, I had a strong feeling something like this may happen. Nevertheless, the fact you had fully intended to release us shows that you have a good heart and a lot of integrity. I may not have a choice, but I shall put my faith and trust in you. Please, don't abuse it." He gave a reassuring smile and happily nodded, thankful that she was still willing to trust him. Celestine then piped in, "Young master, I don't wish to be rude, but I think you need and our dark elf friends should get a bath. Stinky, smell like poo." Ranmao also spoke as she retrieved some air freshener and started spraying it, a small part of her wishing she hadn't sat on her master a moment ago. Now she herself felt a bit dirty as well. "Oh, sewer pipe," Naruto muttered as he remembered, while the rain had largely washed it away on their way back. He supposed the stench was still lingering on their skin. The former queen sighed as she grabbed her master by the wrist and spoke, "Come along. We had best wash ourselves and quickly before we catch a disease. Ranmao, tell Chloe to take a bath after we're done. At her request, the Chinese woman gave a swift nod. A warm bath would do some good for all of them. Once Naruto and Olga entered the bathroom, the former didn't waste much time in getting the water running in the tub, being sure to set it to a comfortable temperature before plugging the drain with the stopper. She slowly eased herself into the large tub and beckoned her master to join her. Come now. We see each other and you do lewd things with Man Mao, so you don't need to be shy. She spoke since he seemed a bit hesitant to enter the tub. Hey, it's not that, I guess. He tried to explain that he didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable or anything, but she silenced him with a raised hand and spoke, hush. I invited you already, did I not? If we're to live together as master and slave, you must be more assertive with your desires. But I don't want you to feel forced to act in a certain way or anything like that, he muttered as he rubbed the back of his head, earning a small scoff from the queen. I forget. Owning the life of another being is still new to you. Your Ranmao, does she seem forced to act the way she does? Does she pamper you because you beat her? If she doesn't, does she lie in your bed because you whip her? Does she fornicate with you because you force yourself on her and she has no choice, acts the way she does because she wants to, and for no other reason? If we want to do something for you or with you, it is because we choose to. And if you desire something, you need only ask. And if we don't like it and express our discomfort, you need only respect our wishes. It's that simple. Now get into the bath before you catch some strange disease after being swamped by that filth. She spoke and then pointed towards the bath water surrounding her. Naruto sighed and realized that she had a point. While he should try to keep their comfort and well-being in mind, he shouldn't have to worry about stepping over broken glass or eggshells all the time. You're right, I guess. I worry that I may let all of this go to my head. I don't want to take advantage of any of you, he mumbled as he stepped into the tub, which was easily large enough to fit 3 or 4 people easily, so there was plenty of space for him and the fallen queen. Noble of you, but I don't think that'll be a problem given your character. But be forewarned, there is a difference between showing kindness and generosity to others and allowing those same people to abuse it. Celestine and her alliance found that out the hard way when their own people turned on them when Volt rose to power. She explained to him, making him nod since he was sometimes told by his classmates Shikamaru or Shino that he was too nice for his own good at times, which is what made it so easy for people to pick on or bully him. Sighing, Olga picked up a bottle of shampoo and poured some of the contents onto his scalp and began to scrub and lather his head with her slender fingers. He wanted to protest and say he could wash himself, but after recalling their conversation he decided to just let her do what she wanted. The queen smirked a bit and continued her ministrations, being careful not to be too rough on him. I'm sorry, you know, I really am. He muttered an apology, still feeling guilty that he couldn't free them, the wound still fresh in his heart. Hush, there's no point in saying sorry over and over for something you cannot help with. You had no prior knowledge nor intentionally gave false hope. You had no desire to cause us any pain, so stop saying you're sorry. If you have the time to say worthless things, then concentrate on doing what you promised, caring for us. And if you're worried about Chloe, give her time. She'll come to terms soon. She spoke in a scolding tone, feeling a strong urge to smack him upside the head for being an imbecile. She wasn't going to spoil him with honeyed words like her counterpart Celestine. She was going to tell him like it was and hammer it into him if need be. Luckily, it seemed the message came through as he nodded, knowing she made a good point. He couldn't change anything by saying he was sorry. That aside, his original goal had never changed. He was still going to protect them. She smiled a bit and dumped some water on his head, washing away the shampoo. She then grabbed a sponge and poured some body wash on it and scrubbed away at his body. HMPH, you should be grateful. It's not every day a child like you gets to enjoy a bath with a pure-blooded dark elf. A very rare treat indeed. She spoke with a haughty expression, and then pressed her soft breasts against his back as she scrubbed his chest. She continued to gently scrub away, her hand drifting down to his stomach, a small blush on her cheeks as she took in the scent of her master. Through the smell of the shampoo and soap, she could detect hints of foxes, of wild forests, and other scents that escaped her memory. And for some reason, it ignited certain desires in her. She had never known the pleasures of male companionship, her old home filled with nothing but lowly servants and filthy swine that believed themselves to be men. If she were truthful, perhaps some part of her didn't want to go back to such an ugly part of the world. Perhaps she would be happier now that she wasn't bound by the duties of being a queen and ruling over a kingdom of darkness. She was no longer burdened by anything that entailed her position of power and authority. Perhaps that in itself was a kind of freedom she'd never felt before. And now here she was, washing a human boy who was but 15 years of age. When she was done washing him, she smiled and spoke. Now then, I washed you. Perhaps you should return the favor, she suggested with a sultry wink, making him blush a bit, but he nodded all the same since it was only fair. You needn't worry about my hair. I'll handle it myself. Be sure to get every nook and cranny of me. She spoke and got on all fours to give him easy access to her back and buttocks, prompting him to mumble a quick understood as he poured fresh body wash on the sponge and began scrubbing her body, being careful not to be too rough on her smooth brown skin. He had to admit, her body felt very nice as his hands roamed her form. She wasn't as plump in certain areas like Celestine, but she was still thicker and most certainly taller than Ranmao. His hand still sank a bit into the dark elf's buttocks as he tried to scrub down her thighs while trying his best to not stare too much at her pink and her brown pucker. She giggled a bit and spoke, "No need to be shy. I get a good look at you all the time, and I must say, it is quite enticing to look at. Feel free to enjoy the view." She gave her rear a small wiggle, making him blush more, and asked her to show him her front. She merely smiled as she flipped over and allowed him to begin washing her front half, his hands roaming her slender stomach and soft breasts, still acting so pure and innocent. But how long can you suppress your hormones and desires for a woman's flesh? It is no secret what you do with Ranmao. Don't tell me you think you'll be betraying her if you enjoy your other slaves. Perhaps you need to be corrupted even more. She spoke teasingly, giving him a sly wink. It didn't take a genius to figure out she was obviously trying to seduce him, but he wasn't sure if it was appropriate to have so soon after his announcing that they couldn't go free. Was this her way of coping or showing that she was okay with staying either way? He didn't want to take it that far quite yet. Sensing his hesitation, the fallen queen spoke, trying to play the gentlemanly act. Or are you simply playing hard to get either way? It would only make a woman desire you even more, little boy. Best be careful you don't get eaten up. She teased him at the end, and her lips sensually. He tried not to let himself get so flustered, but he wasn't used to flirting. Ranmao usually expressed herself by actions rather than words. By Kami, why couldn't he stop getting all hot and bothered every 5 minutes? After a few more seconds, he finished washing the dark elf and left the bath with a bow as he muttered, "Thanks for bathing me and for talking with me," before snatching another towel to dry himself off with and departed with a massive. Olga couldn't help but smile to herself. It seemed human boys were quite fun to play with, and she wondered what other games she could play with him. Perhaps she could punish him for leaving her in a state of arousal. She would need to speak with Ranmao and discuss with her the best course in opening him up more to matters. A while later, the strange family of a master and his slaves were now gathered around the dinner table, enjoying their evening meal after everyone had their baths. Chloe was sadly picking at her food, her eyes downcast as a dark cloud of depression hanged over her head. Her master wanted to ask if she was okay, but decided against it since she certainly didn't seem okay and he wanted to give her some space. Ranmao, as per usual, was sitting in his lap and personally feeding him while the High Elf and her longtime enemy, former enemy, were chatting about a movie they saw on the TV an hour or so ago. Something about a cowboy and a space ranger that was quite endearing to them for some reason. "Excuse me, am I interrupting?" spoke a new voice. When they turned, they saw it was the woman that Naruto and the Dark Elves had earlier rescued from drowning. She was currently wrapped in a blanket and saw they were all in them, though she didn't question it since beneath the blanket she herself was and supposed it was some kind of rule of theirs. "Ah, you're awake. How are you feeling?" the Uzumaki asked, with a small smile. He was surprised when the Chinese girl hopped off his lap and approached the stranger, giving her an almost piercing gaze as she looked at the woman's face. "Seemed familiar." "Met before?" the golden-eyed woman asked, making the blue-haired woman smile a bit as she shook her head. "I don't believe so. It would be very difficult to forget a face such as yours." The stranger spoke and then gave a small bow to her host and continued to speak. "Thank you for saving me. From the bottom of my heart, in 1,000, no, 1,000,000 times, thank you. Don't worry about it. And it wasn't just me. Chloe and Olga helped too. In fact, it was Olga's magic that helped save you." The blonde responded and gestured to the Dark Elves, the fallen queen smirking in satisfaction to the praise as she ran a hand through her silky hair. Naruto then asked their new guest, "You seemed pretty out of it earlier. Do you remember what happened?" The brunette adopted a thinking pose for a few moments, as if she were trying to find the answer to his question. Finally, she replied in a sad tone, "I'm afraid I have no memory of how I came to wake in that awful place. Nor do I have any memories. The only thing I remember is that I am, or was, called Hannah Anafellows. All else is but a fog. At least we have a name. I'll ask the Hokage if anyone knows who you are or is looking for you. Until then, you can stay," he offered with a kind smile, both Olga and Celestine smiling at his kind-hearted nature while Chloe looked up with a ghost of a smile herself. "That is all well and good, but I must make a request. Please let me serve you. I owe you my life after all." "These women, are they perhaps your servants?" she asked, since it didn't seem like they had any relation to him, and came to the assumption that perhaps they served him. Naruto rubbed the back of his head uncomfortably and replied, "No, they are actually my slaves." He couldn't afford to lie to her, but how would she react to his status as a slave owner? "Oh, I see. Very well then," was her answer, stunning them all at the fact she'd accepted his answer so easily. "You're not bothered at all that I own slaves, and you aren't surprised to see elves?" the Jinchuriki asked, his second question directed towards the fact that she hadn't reacted at all to his elven slaves yet. "They're elves?" Hannah asked in mild surprise, making them all wonder if she was totally oblivious or if she was just messing with them. Olga's eyebrow twitched a bit as she deadpanned, "These pointy ears aren't for show." The blue-haired woman shrugged her shoulders and replied, "You certainly don't treat them as slaves. I may not have memories of my own, but I do recall that slaves are often treated like trash. But here they sit at your table, all of you feasting together as equals, your bodies being free of any wounds or signs of ill health. I had no idea they were slaves until you mentioned it." At her explanation, Naruto realized that she did indeed make a point. He hadn't ever thought about it like that, once again showing him how oblivious and naive he was. "At any rate, please let me serve you. Accept my services as your new maid." "Would you not need someone to look after your property and slaves while you're away?" she asked at the end, making the whiskered teen think for a moment before nodding. He would feel more comfortable knowing someone was watching out for the girls while he was away at school or possibly on missions. Plus, with his stipend, he could easily pay her for her time. "Okay, you can stay if you want. It'd be nice to know someone's looking after them for me. As for your first order of business, please take a bath and wash the bedsheets you were sleeping in. You were in a goddamn sewer pipe, for crying out loud." Naruto spoke, making Hana tense up upon realizing she may have soiled his bedsheets. Right away she spoke and went to perform her needed tasks, hoping to make a good impression for him. "Honestly, the rate you're finding women to fill your household with is utterly astounding," Olga muttered with a mixture of both annoyance and amusement. She was sure that there were countless men who would wish for that kind of good fortune. "I agree with Olga Dono. But isn't it getting kind of crowded now?" Celestine pointed out. The place was already quite cramped as it was with the 5 of them. But a 6th person might be too many. "I'll talk with my landlady and see if any of the apartments under us are available," Naruto promised, adding yet another chore to his plate, but at least now sharing the horrible truth of the slave seal was over and done with. He also had promised to meet privately with Hinata, which begs the question, what did she want to speak to him about? As he thought about this, neither he nor his other slaves acknowledged the soft thumping coming from inside a certain closet. Meanwhile, Hyuga Compound, Elder Council Chambers. Deep within a darkened chamber, illuminated by candlelight, the elders of the Hyuga clan sat around in a circle, surrounding a statue. Unknown to them, the form of Hinata Hyuga was quietly watching from the shadows, spying on this meeting. For over a year now, to her knowledge, the elders had repeatedly gathered in this chamber and were speaking to this statue, though she suspected they may have done so longer than that. The first time she bore witness to this, she was surprised when the statue had actually spoken. It was a hideous and ominous-looking thing, depicting some kind of angelic figure that seemed to be in agony. One of the elders spoke. "We are in a tense situation with our clan head Hayashi. He wishes to permanently abolish the practice of the caged bird seal and unify our clan. If he does so, our only means of controlling the side branch will be gone. We cannot allow this to happen." Hinata tensed angrily, furious that they were simply trying to cling to their power over other humans. People like that sickened her, serving as a prime example of everything that was currently wrong with her clan. It reminded her of the countless slave owners that abused their slaves every day. She was shocked that Naruto had become a master, but she knew he wasn't like a typical slave owner. But that was beside the point. The statue let out a chuckle as it spoke in a masculine voice. "As I explained to you previously, you must control him and stamp out any resistance in him. Have you done everything as I instructed?" "Yes. Before the week is out, Hinata will be cast down from her status as Hayashi's successor and will be branded with the caged bird seal. In doing so, we can control both Hayashi and his other child Hanabi. In turn, our own successors will carry the torch and continue our traditions." One of the elders spoke with an evil smile. Having heard enough, Hinata decided to leave before she lost control of herself and exposed her position. The elders seemed quite smug in their beliefs, thinking that they could control the Hyuga clan's future. But she had a plan in mind to pull the rug right out from under them. Unknown to them, she had already told her father of their treachery. Now they just had to toss a wrench in their plans. But still, what was that statue? Where did it come from? She knew it was from a foreign nation far from the shores of the Shinobi nations, but not much else. She once used her Byakugan to inspect it and found 2 strange energies in a constant state of dueling with one another. Aside from that, she knew little else. Not that it mattered. By tomorrow, she would be free of them and all of their infernal politics, and she would also be with the one person she desired most. Even if she was unworthy of him, she could still support him in her own way, and nothing was going to stop her, least of all a bunch of aging old men.